Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. David Ramirez had measured 12 inches of rainfall in 4 hours, which meant the Hoh River Trail would be impassable by evening, which meant the recovery team wouldn't reach Madison Garcia's last known location for at least 48 hours. Which meant, and this was the part his analytical mind kept circling back to, she would have been alone out there for 5 full days by then, assuming she was still capable of counting. He logged the precipitation data into his weather station notebook with the mechanical precision that had defined his 7 years with the National Park Service. The numbers didn't lie. Numbers never lied. Madison Garcia, 26, Seattle resident, experienced day hiker, had checked in at the ranger station at 0847 hours on October 23, 2007. She had not checked out. Her silver Honda Civic remained in the parking lot, accumulating moss and fir needles. Her emergency contact, a mother in Tacoma, had stopped calling after the first 72 hours, as if silence was easier than hope. The Hoh rainforest received an average of 140 inches of rainfall annually, making it one of the wettest places in the contiguous United States. David found comfort in statistics. The Sitka spruce trees surrounding the ranger station grew to heights exceeding 300 feet. The Roosevelt elk population numbered approximately 250 individuals within the park boundaries. These were facts, measurable, verifiable, unlike the growing catalog of inconsistencies in Madison Garcia's case file that sat on his desk, pages swollen with humidity. You're still here. Park Superintendent Patricia Volkmann stood in the doorway of his office, rain dripping from her Gore-Tex jacket onto the wooden floor. She was 58, 23 years with NPS, and possessed the kind of weathered pragmatism that came from watching too many search and rescue operations end badly. Reviewing the timeline, David said, not looking up from his notes. Her vehicle was last seen at 0847. The trail camera at mile marker 2.3 captured her at 0934, but the camera at mile marker 4.7 never registered her passage. Equipment fails, David, especially in this climate. The camera was functioning. It captured 17 other hikers that day. Deer, a black bear at 15:23 hours. He finally met her eyes. She should have passed that camera between 10:30 and 10:45, based on average hiking speed and terrain difficulty. Patricia moved into the office, her boots leaving wet prints. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm observing that Madison Garcia covered 2.3 miles in 47 minutes, then apparently vanished before reaching the next checkpoint, which was located 4 miles further along a trail with no alternate routes, no side paths, and no geographic features that would explain a deviation. People get disoriented, especially alone. David tapped his pen against the notebook, a rhythmic tick that surfaced when data refused to align. She's the 4th person this year to disappear in this section of the Hoh River Trail, all between mile markers 2.3 and 4.7, all experienced hikers, all alone. He pulled 3 additional files from his drawer. Kevin Tanaka, March 17th, Jennifer Yamamoto, June 2nd, Eric Sato, August 9th, same pattern, passed the first camera, never reached the second. The superintendent's expression shifted from tired patience to something harder. You're making connections that aren't there. I'm identifying a statistical anomaly that warrants investigation. David. She sat down across from him, her voice dropping. I know you're new to this park. I know you transferred here from Yellowstone because you wanted somewhere quieter, somewhere where you could focus on data collection and trail maintenance instead of tourist management. But this is different. This is... She paused, choosing words carefully. This is something you should let go. The silence between them filled with the sound of rain against the windows, a constant percussion that had become the soundtrack of his life here. Outside, the forest disappeared into gray mist at 50 feet, the ancient trees reduced to dark suggestions in the fog. What happened to the others? David asked quietly. Patricia stood. Kevin Tanaka's body was found 3 months after his disappearance, 8 miles off trail in a ravine. Cause of death was hypothermia and blunt force trauma, consistent with a fall. Jennifer Yamamoto's remains were discovered by a climbing team in July, 12 miles from her last known location. The medical examiner attributed death to exposure. Eric Sato was recovered in September, also off trail, also deceased. The pattern is tragic but explainable. Disorientation, panic, poor decision-making in adverse conditions. 8 miles, 12 miles. How does someone get that far off a clearly marked trail? Fear does strange things to people, David. Once you realize you're lost, once true panic sets in, rational thought disappears. They run. They make terrible choices. She moved toward the door. Let the search and rescue team do their job. You focus on yours. After she left, David returned to his notes, but his mind kept circling back to the names. Tanaka, Yamamoto, Sato, Garcia. 4 Japanese surnames in a park that saw thousands of visitors annually from dozens of ethnic backgrounds. He opened his laptop, a bulky Dell that took 3 minutes to boot, and accessed the park's visitor database for 2007. Of the 6,847 hikers who had checked in at the Ho Rainforest Station between January and October, approximately 9% had Japanese surnames. 4 missing persons from a demographic representing roughly 600 individuals. A disappearance rate of 0.67% compared to 0.04% for the general hiking population. The numbers didn't lie. He was still running calculations when his radio crackled to life at 17:34 hours. Static, then a voice. Station 5. This is Search Team Beta. We've reached the marker 2.3 position. Beginning sweep pattern Alpha. David picked up the transmitter. Copy that, Beta. Weather station indicates another system moving in. You have approximately 90 minutes before visibility drops to critical levels. Understood, we're moving fast. He plotted their route on his topographic map, marking their position with a red pin. The trail between 2.3 and 4.7 followed the Ho River through old-growth forest, gaining 340 feet in elevation over terrain rated as moderate difficulty. No cliffs, no significant water crossings beyond the main river, which was bridged. Nothing that should pose a serious threat to experienced hikers in daylight. The radio remained silent for 23 minutes. When it sparked back to life, the voice on the other end carried a different quality. Station 5, we've found something. Coordinates 47.8599 north, 123, 9347 west. You should see this. David grabbed his pack, already loaded with his standard field equipment, Garmin GPS map, 60 CSX, Motorola CP200 backup radio, first aid kit, emergency shelter, water purification tablets, and a laminated copy of the area's topographic survey. He locked the station and headed out into the rain. The forest swallowed him immediately. The trail was a tunnel through green darkness, the canopy so dense that rain didn't fall so much as materialize from the air itself. Everything dripped. Everything grew. Moss covered every surface in thick pelts, club moss, sphagnum moss, liverwort, creating landscapes in miniature across fallen logs. Nurse trees hosted entire ecosystems in their decay. The smell was rich and ancient, the scent of things breaking down and building up simultaneously. Life and death so intertwined as to be indistinguishable. David maintained a steady pace of 2.8 miles per hour, his boots finding purchase on the muddy trail through muscle memory. He'd hiked this route 47 times since transferring to Olympic in April. He knew every switchback, every notable tree, every subtle grade change. The forest was a system, complex but ultimately comprehensible through patient observation and data collection. He reached the coordinates in 39 minutes. 3 members of the search team stood in a small clearing 20 feet off the trail, their headlamps cutting through the gathering darkness. They weren't looking at the ground, they were looking up. Ramirez, said team leader Mike Brennan, a volunteer firefighter who'd been doing SAR work for 15 years. This doesn't make any sense. David followed their gazes. Madison Garcia's backpack hung from a branch approximately 40 feet above the forest floor. Not thrown there, The straps were carefully looped over the branch, the pack positioned upright as if placed by hand. The tree was a western hemlock with smooth bark and no lower branches for at least 30 feet, not climbable without specialized equipment. "How long has it been there?" David asked, pulling out his camera to document the scene. "Can't say. Moss hasn't started growing on it yet, so probably not the full 5 days, but that doesn't..." Mike gestured helplessly at the tree. "There's no way to get up there. No ladder, no rope marks on the bark, no disturbed foliage on adjacent trees. It's like someone flew up and hung it." David photographed the pack from multiple angles, noting the position relative to landmarks. "We need to recover it. Already called for climbing gear. Should be here in 20 minutes. Mike moved closer to the tree, examining the base. "You see anything weird here?" David crouched beside him. The ground around the hemlock's trunk was disturbed, the moss scraped away in places, the soil beneath exposed. But the pattern wasn't random. It was circular. Someone had drawn a circle around the entire tree, approximately 8 feet in diameter. And within that circle, pressed into the soft earth, were dozens of impressions. Footprints, all facing inward, all positioned at the circle's edge, as if people had stood shoulder to shoulder surrounding the tree. "How many?" David asked, though his mind was already counting. Mike played his flashlight over the impressions. 16, maybe 17. Different shoe sizes, different tread patterns. His voice dropped. "They just stood here, all of them, facing the tree." David took photographs, measured the circle's diameter with his tape measure, made detailed notes about each footprint's characteristics. The analytical part of his mind cataloged everything methodically. Another part, the part he typically suppressed in favor of data and logic, was registering something else. The clearing felt wrong. The ambient temperature was lower here, noticeably so. And the forest sounds that had accompanied his hike, the drip of water, the rustle of small animals, the occasional bird call, had ceased. The climbing equipment arrived, and it took Search Team Beta another 40 minutes to rig a system and retrieve the backpack. When they lowered it down, David examined the contents under his headlamp. Madison Garcia's wallet was inside, cash and ID intact. A Nalgene bottle, still half full of water. Trail snacks, energy bars, an orange. Her cell phone, a Nokia 6285, was dead. But that wasn't unusual given the lack of cell coverage in the rainforest. What was unusual was the presence of her camera, a digital Canon PowerShot SD1000. Experienced hikers didn't abandon functioning cameras. He turned it on. The battery indicator showed 70% charge. The last photo was time-stamped 10:47 hours on October 23rd, which aligned with when she should have been between the two trail cameras. The image showed the trail ahead, the path disappearing into typical rainforest fog. Nothing unusual. David scrolled back through earlier photos. Madison had documented her hike methodically. The trailhead sign, interesting fungi, a deer, a particularly large Sitka spruce. He kept scrolling, watching her morning walk in reverse. Then he saw the photos from the clearing. 6 images taken between 10:37 and 10:45 hours. The first showed what appeared to be a person standing motionless on the trail ahead. The figure was distant, at least 100 feet away, rendered indistinct by fog. The second photo, taken 2 minutes later, showed the same figure, now closer. The third, closer still. In the fourth photograph, taken at 10:42 hours, the figure was approximately 30 feet away, and David could make out details. Long black hair obscuring the face, white clothing that might have been a dress or robe. The fifth photograph showed the figure at 15 feet. Its head was tilted at an angle that David's rational mind initially tried to explain as a trick of perspective, but couldn't. The neck was bent too far, twisted almost completely backward while the body faced forward. The sixth photograph was a blur of motion, as if Madison had dropped the camera while the shutter was still open. But in that blur, in the streaks of gray and green and white, David could make out something that made his hands start to shake despite the methodical notes he'd been taking. A face, inches from the lens, inverted. The features rendered in negative by the camera's flash. Black eyes where there should have been white, white teeth where there should have been darkness. And hair, so much hair, filling the frame like spilled ink. "Ramirez? You okay?" Mike was watching him with concern. David realized he'd been holding his breath. He exhaled slowly, forcing his analytical training to reassert itself. "The camera documents a potential encounter with another person on the trail. We should canvass the area, look for other hikers who might have been present at that time." Mike looked at the camera's display over David's shoulder. His face went pale. "Jesus Christ. That doesn't look like a person." "The image quality is poor due to motion blur and lighting conditions," David said, but his voice sounded uncertain even to himself. "The flash created artifacts. The human brain is predisposed to recognize faces in ambiguous stimuli. It's called pareidolia." He downloaded the photos to his laptop back at the station, spending hours examining each pixel, measuring angles, attempting to reconstruct the scene rationally. But the more he analyzed, the less sense it made. The figure's proportions were wrong. The anatomy was wrong. The shadow it cast, or rather didn't cast, was wrong. At 0237 hours, he finally admitted defeat and closed his laptop. Rain drummed against the station's roof in a rhythm that sounded almost like footsteps. He lay on the cot in his office, staring at the ceiling, his mind still churning through calculations. 4 disappearances, 4 Japanese surnames, 1 photograph of something that shouldn't exist, and a circle of footprints surrounding a tree where Madison Garcia's backpack hung 40 feet above the ground. He woke at 0623 hours to his radio crackling. "Station 5, this is Beta. We've got something else. You need to come back out here." The rain had intensified overnight and the trail was slick with mud. David made worse time than usual, nearly losing his footing twice on descents. By the time he reached the clearing, dawn was attempting to break through the forest canopy, creating a dim gray light that rendered everything in shades of charcoal. The search team had expanded their sweep pattern, and they'd found it a quarter-mile northeast of the clearing, in a part of the forest so dense that David couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. A structure, built from deadfall and living branches woven together, approximately 8 feet tall and 6 feet in diameter. The opening faced east, and inside, David felt his breakfast of instant coffee and granola bar rise in his throat. Madison Garcia sat against the back wall of the structure, legs folded, hands resting in her lap. She was alive. Her eyes were open, tracking their movement. But she didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there, breathing slowly, her face blank. "Ms. Garcia?" Mike approached carefully. "Madison? Can you hear me?" No response. Her eyes moved to Mike's face, registered his presence, then moved away again as if he were no more interesting than the trees. The paramedics arrived within the hour, hiking in with a portable stretcher. Madison didn't resist when they examined her, didn't respond to questions or stimuli. Her vital signs were stable: pulse 62, blood pressure 118/76, temperature 97.8. She was dehydrated and had lost approximately 12 pounds, but otherwise showed no signs of physical trauma. "Catatonic state," the lead paramedic said quietly. "Probably psychological shock. We need to get her to a facility." They carried her out on the stretcher, and David watched her face as they passed. Her eyes met his for just a moment, and in that moment, he saw something that his analytical mind tried and failed to categorize. Not fear, not confusion, something else. Recognition, perhaps, or resignation. Patricia arrived at the station at 1434 hours. David had returned, written his report, and spent the last 3 hours staring at the photographs from Madison's camera without making any additional progress in understanding them. "She's at Forks Community Hospital," Patricia said. "The doctors say it could be days or weeks before she's able to communicate. They've seen cases like this before, trauma-induced dissociation, the mind essentially shutting down to protect itself from whatever happened." "What happened to her?" David asked. Patricia sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. She looked older than she had yesterday, the lines around her eyes deeper. "I don't know, but I need you to stop investigating. This is beyond our mandate. The professionals will handle it." The other 3 victims were found dead. Madison Garcia was found alive. That's a significant deviation from pattern. It warrants further analysis. "David." Patricia's voice carried a warning. "Let it go." He almost did. He almost filed his report, closed Madison Garcia's case file, and returned to his normal duties of trail maintenance and weather monitoring and the comfortable routine of data collection. But that night, unable to sleep, he opened his laptop and began researching. Japanese folklore, specifically, yurei, vengeful spirits of the dead who remained in the physical world due to powerful emotions at the time of death. Typically depicted with long black hair, white funeral garments, and limbs that hung unnaturally. Known to manifest in lonely, isolated places. Known to target specific individuals for reasons related to past grievances or injustices. The accounts were centuries old, but the descriptions matched what he'd seen in Madison Garcia's photographs with an accuracy that made his hands shake as he typed notes. He cross-referenced the disappearance locations with historical records of the area. The Olympic Peninsula had a significant Japanese-American population in the early 20th century, many working in the timber industry. Then came 1942 and Executive Order 9266, forced relocation, internment camps, families given days to sell their property, abandon their homes, leave their lives behind. David found property records from 1941. A Japanese logging camp had operated in the Ho River area, approximately 2 miles from where the disappearances had occurred. The camp had been abandoned in March 1942 when its workers were relocated to the Tule Lake Segregation Center in California. He kept digging. Newspaper archives from the Port Angeles Evening News, April 1942. Tragedy strikes as local woman dies in accident. The article described how Emiko Tanaka, 24, wife of logging camp foreman Hiroshi Tanaka, had been found dead near the camp. She'd fallen from a tree, according to the coroner's report. Her funeral had been held 2 days before her husband and the rest of the camp's residents were forcibly relocated. But there were other articles too, ones that painted a different picture. Letters to the editor questioning the circumstances of Emiko Tanaka's death. A statement from her sister claiming it wasn't an accident, that Emiko had been threatened by local residents who resented the Japanese logging operation. An investigation that was opened and then abruptly closed when the camp was emptied. David looked at the photographs again. The figure with the twisted neck, the circle of footprints, the structure in the forest. His analytical mind tried to construct a rational explanation, but the data wouldn't support it. The evidence led to a conclusion that violated every principle of empirical observation he'd built his career on. At 3:47 hours, he made a decision. He would hike to the site of the old logging camp. He would document what he found there, and he would prove, one way or another, whether there was a connection between Emiko Tanaka's death 65 years ago and the disappearances of 4 hikers with Japanese surnames. He left at dawn, telling no one where he was going. The trail to the old campsite wasn't marked on modern maps, but he'd found descriptions in historical documents and cross-referenced them with topographic surveys. He hiked for 3 hours, leaving the maintained trail behind, pushing through dense salal and vine maple, his GPS guiding him to coordinates that corresponded with property descriptions from 1941. He found the camp just before noon, or what remained of it, rotted foundation posts, a rusted saw blade half buried in moss, fragments of cedar shingles. The forest had reclaimed almost everything, but the basic layout was still visible if you knew what to look for. Main building here, equipment shed there, living quarters along the eastern edge, and a tree, a massive western hemlock standing where the camp center would have been, its trunk at least 8 feet in diameter, its canopy disappearing into the fog above. David approached slowly, his boots sinking into the soft forest floor. The bark near the base showed scarring, old damage that had healed over with thick ridges of growth. He pulled out his camera and photographed the patterns, then scraped away some of the moss to examine them more closely. They were rope marks, Someone had tied rope around this tree, years ago, tight enough to scar the bark before it was removed or rotted away. David's radio crackled to life, making him jump. "Station 5, this is base. Ramirez, what's your 20? He pulled out the radio. "I'm conducting a survey of historical sites, approximately 4 miles northwest of the station. You need to return immediately. We've got another situation." His stomach dropped. "What kind of situation?" "Madison Garcia. She walked out of Forks Community Hospital 3 hours ago. Just walked out barefoot, wearing a hospital gown. Security footage shows her heading east toward the mountains." "David, she's coming back here." He ran. Not toward the station, but toward the section of trail where Madison had been found. If she was drawn back to this place, that's where she would go. The forest blurred around him as he pushed through the undergrowth, his rational mind screaming at him to slow down, to be careful, to think logically. But another part of him, the part that had been growing stronger since he'd seen those photographs, knew that time was critical. He reached the clearing at 14:23 hours. Madison Garcia stood in the center of the circle, barefoot on the cold ground, hospital gown soaked through with rain. She was drawing something in the mud with her finger, moving in a trance-like state. "Madison?" David approached slowly. "Madison, I'm David Ramirez. I'm with the National Park Service. You need to come with me. It's not safe out here." She didn't acknowledge his presence, just kept drawing. David moved closer, close enough to see what she was creating. A name, in Japanese characters. Tianjong Hoi Meiji, Tanaka Emiko. "You see her?" Madison said. Her voice was rough from disuse, barely above a whisper. "She showed me, she shows all of us, the ones who carry the blood, the ones who remember, even if we don't know we remember." "What did she show you?" Madison looked up at him, and her eyes were black. Not the irises, the entire eye, sclera and all, black as ink. What they did, the rope, the tree, they said it was an accident. They said she fell, but they hanged her. 3 men from town. They hanged her because the camp was being closed, because they wanted the timber rights, because they could. And her husband was already gone, already on the train to the camp, and no one investigated because no one cared about a dead Japanese woman in 1942. The temperature dropped. David could see his breath now, could see Madison's breath, both of them exhaling clouds of vapor in air that had been warm minutes before. "She stays," Madison continued, her voice taking on a sing-song quality. "She stays because her death was violent and unjust. She stays because her spirit could not move on. She stays and she waits, and when we come, those of us who carry Japanese blood, she shows us. She makes us see. She makes us remember what was forgotten. Madison, we need to leave. Right now." The others tried to run. Tanaka, Yamamoto, Sato. They saw what I saw, and they ran, and she followed. "She can't leave this place, but she can make you run until you can't run anymore. Until you fall. Until you die alone in the forest like she died alone with a rope around her neck." Madison's eyes, those terrible black eyes, fixed on David. "But you're not Japanese. She doesn't want you. She doesn't care about you. You should go." David heard it then, a sound like silk dragging across bark. He turned slowly. She was there. Emiko Tanaka, or what remained of her. Her neck was bent at that impossible angle he'd seen in the photograph, broken where the rope had snapped bone and cartilage. Her hair hung down to her knees, black and thick and moving in a wind that didn't exist. Her white funeral kimono was stained brown with old blood and dirt. She didn't walk. She drifted. Her feet, bare, the toes pointed downward, hovered inches above the ground. Every rational thought in David's mind shut down. This wasn't possible. This violated laws of physics, of biology, of reality itself. But she was there, as real as the trees, as real as the rain, moving toward them with a motion that was wrong in ways his brain couldn't process. Madison was speaking again, but David couldn't hear her over the roaring in his ears. He wanted to run. Every survival instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He could only watch as the thing that had been Emiko Tanaka drifted closer, her head hanging at that broken angle, her black hair spreading across the ground like spilled oil. She stopped 10 feet away. Her head lifted, not the way a living person's head would lift, but like a puppet on strings jerking upward until she faced them directly. Her eyes were holes, empty sockets that went back forever, deeper than a skull should allow, darkness that had depth and presence. When she opened her mouth, no sound came out. But David heard her anyway, inside his head, words in a language he didn't speak but somehow understood. I stayed. I stayed when they buried me in shame. I stayed when they forgot my name. I stayed for 65 years in this place where I died, and I will stay forever. And all those who share my blood will know what was done, will feel what I felt, will remember what they tried to erase. Madison was crying now, tears running down her face, but she wasn't looking at David. She was looking at Emiko. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what they did. I'm sorry you suffered. But I'm not them. My family wasn't even in this country in 1942. I'm not responsible. You carry the blood. You carry the memory. That is enough. David found his voice. This won't bring you peace. This won't change what happened. The empty eyes turned to him. Peace. The word echoed inside his skull. You speak of peace. Where was peace when the rope tightened? Where was peace when I kicked and struggled and died slowly because they tied the knot wrong? Where was peace when they cut me down and buried me without ceremony, without respect, without justice? I don't know, David said, and he realized he was crying too. I don't know, but this, revenge on people who weren't even alive when you died, this isn't justice. Then what is? The question hung in the air. David didn't have an answer. How could he? How do you bring justice to a wrong committed 65 years ago by people long dead? How do you give peace to a spirit that had suffered such a violent, unjust end? He thought about the data he'd collected, the patterns he'd identified, the analytical framework he'd always relied on to make sense of the world. None of it applied here. This was beyond measurement, beyond logic, beyond rational explanation. But maybe that was the point. Maybe some things couldn't be solved with data and observation. Maybe some wounds couldn't be closed with analysis. Tell me your story, he said quietly. Tell me everything. Let me write it down. Let me document it. Let me make sure people know what happened to you. Let me give you a voice. The spirit of Emiko Tanaka tilted her head, that broken neck allowing angles that made David's stomach turn, considering him. You would do this? You, who are not of my blood? Yes. Why? Because it's wrong that you were forgotten. Because what happened to you matters. Because he struggled to articulate thoughts that had never been part of his analytical worldview. Because bearing witness is important. Because remembering is important. Because the truth matters even when it can't change the past. The silence stretched. The rain fell. The forest waited. Finally, she spoke again. For 65 years, I have shown my suffering to those who came here. For 65 years, I have made them feel my pain. 4 ran. 4 died. This one, she gestured toward Madison. This one stayed. This one listened. And now you offer to listen as well. Yes. Words will not bring me peace. Paper will not heal this wound. But perhaps the terrible face showed something that might have been sadness. Perhaps being remembered is a kind of justice. A small justice. But justice nonetheless. David pulled out his notebook. His hands were shaking, but he managed to hold his pen steady. Tell me everything. And she did. The story poured out, not in words, but in images that flooded his mind. He saw her life, her marriage to Hiroshi Tanaka, their arrival at the logging camp in 1940, the growing tension as war approached, the harassment from local residents who resented Japanese immigrants, the escalating threats. He saw the night she died, 3 men coming to the camp after the workers had been removed. Her alone, waiting for permission to join her husband at the internment camp. The rope, the tree, the slow, horrible death. He saw her body being found. The cursory investigation, the hasty burial, the camp being dismantled, the land being sold, her death being forgotten as if she had never existed. He wrote it all down, every detail, every moment. His pen moved across page after page of his notebook, filling it with the testimony of a woman who had been silenced for 65 years. When he finished, his hand was cramped and his face was wet with tears. Madison Garcia sat on the ground, her eyes returned to their normal brown, watching him with an expression of exhausted understanding. The spirit of Emiko Tanaka stood before them, her form somehow less solid than before, as if the act of telling her story had begun to release her. "Thank you," David said. She inclined her head, a small, dignified gesture that somehow worked despite the broken angle. "You will share this?" "I will. I'll make sure people know what happened here. I'll see that you're remembered, I promise." The darkness in her empty eyes seemed to lessen, just slightly. "Then perhaps I can rest. Perhaps after 65 years I can finally rest." She faded slowly, dissolving into the mist like ink dispersing in water. The last thing to disappear was her hair, black strands that hung in the air for a moment before vanishing completely. The temperature rose. The forest sounds returned. The drip of rain, the rustle of small animals, the distant call of a raven. The world became solid and real again. David looked at Madison. "Can you walk?" She nodded. "I think so. I think I'm free now." She showed me everything she showed the others, but I didn't run. I let her show me. I witnessed it. And somehow, that was enough. They hiked back to the station together, slowly, supporting each other when the trail became difficult. Patricia was waiting with a search team, relief flooding her face when she saw them emerge from the forest. What the hell happened out there? David looked at his notebook, at the pages filled with Emiko Tanaka's story. "I'll write a full report. But the short version is that we've been conducting search and rescue operations in an area with historical significance we weren't aware of. There were injustices committed here during World War II that were never addressed. I think," he chose his words carefully, "I think the land remembers, and I think we have a responsibility to acknowledge that." Patricia studied him for a long moment. "You've changed." "Yes," David admitted, "I have." Over the following weeks, David compiled his findings into a comprehensive report. Not for the National Park Service, they wouldn't have known what to do with it, but for historical societies, for Japanese American community organizations, for anyone who would listen. He documented Emiko Tanaka's death, provided the evidence he'd found, pushed for a proper memorial at the site where she'd died. It took time. It took patience. It took convincing people that this mattered, that historical wrongs deserved acknowledgement even when they couldn't be corrected. But eventually a small memorial was erected in the Hoh rainforest, a simple stone marker with her name in both English and Japanese, an acknowledgement of what had happened, a recognition that she had existed, that she had mattered, that her death had been unjust. David visited the memorial on a gray October afternoon, exactly 1 year after Madison Garcia had disappeared. The forest was quiet around him, the constant rain creating a soft susurration through the canopy. He stood before the stone, reading the inscription, "Tanaka Emiko, 1918-1942. Remembered." "I kept my promise," he said to the forest. "You're not forgotten anymore." The wind picked up, rustling through the trees with a sound like silk moving across bark. For just a moment, David thought he saw something in the mist between the trees, a figure in white, standing at a distance. But when he looked directly at it, there was nothing there. He wasn't sure if she was finally at peace. The analytical part of him knew he never could be sure, that measuring peace was impossible, that some questions had no empirical answers. But he hoped. That was new for him, Hope based not on data but on faith. Faith that bearing witness mattered. Faith that remembering was a form of justice, however small. Madison Garcia called him that evening. She'd been living with her mother in Tacoma since her release from the hospital, undergoing therapy to process what she'd experienced. Her voice was stronger now, more grounded in the present. "I hiked the Hoh River Trail today," she said. "Made it all the way to the Blue Glacier without any problems. No visions, no compulsions, just a normal hike." "That's good," David said. "I'm glad. The memorial is beautiful. Thank you for that, for giving her a voice. You helped, you stayed, you witnessed. That mattered." "Yeah." A pause. "David, do you think she's gone? Really gone?" He thought about his answer carefully. The old David, the one who existed before that October, would have dismissed the question as meaningless. But the new David, the one who had been fundamentally changed by witnessing something that shouldn't exist, understood that some questions were worth asking even when definitive answers were impossible. "I think she got what she needed. Whether that means she's gone or just at rest, I don't know. But I don't think she's suffering anymore. That's good enough for me." After they said goodbye, David sat at his desk, looking at the weather data he'd been collecting. The numbers were the same as always: precipitation levels, temperature fluctuations, barometric pressure readings, facts, measurements, data. But now he understood that reality was larger than what could be measured. That truth included experiences that defied quantification. That some of the most important things in the world, justice, remembrance, peace, couldn't be captured in statistics and charts. The forest had taught him that. Or rather, Emiko Tanaka had taught him that. He opened his notebook to a fresh page and began writing his evening log. The entries were still precise, still analytical, but now they included observations that his former self would have dismissed as subjective and therefore meaningless. October 23rd, 2008, temperature 47 degrees, rainfall 2.3 inches, barometric pressure 30.21, visibility good, trail conditions stable. The forest feels different today, quieter, almost peaceful, as if something that was broken has finally been mended. He paused, then added one more line. "Perhaps some wounds do heal, given enough time and attention. Perhaps even death can find rest, given enough remembrance." Outside, the rain continued its endless percussion against the station's roof. But to David, it no longer sounded like footsteps, it just sounded like rain, and somehow that was enough. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Lisa Hoffman didn't believe in evil, but she believed in Stupid. Stupid was hiking into the maze in mid-July without adequate water. Stupid was ignoring weather advisories when the temperature hit 110 degrees. Stupid was trusting your GPS in a place where the sandstone walls created interference patterns that made satellite navigation about as reliable as throwing darts at a map. And Connor Burke, according to the incident report sitting on her desk, had managed to accomplish all three varieties of Stupid in a single afternoon. Lisa had been a ranger at Canyonlands National Park for 7 years, stationed primarily in the remote Maze District. 200 square miles of twisted canyons and labyrinthine rock formations in southeastern Utah that saw maybe 2,000 visitors per year, compared to the 750,000 who crowded into the more accessible island in the Sky District. She'd dealt with plenty of Stupid in those 7 years. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, broken ankles from scrambling on slick rock, tourists who thought the American Southwest was basically Disneyland with slightly better scenery. What she hadn't dealt with was missing persons whose last known GPS coordinates placed them in 3 different locations simultaneously. Lisa studied the data pulled from Connor Burke's smartphone, recovered that morning by a climbing party near the Chocolate Drops Formation. The phone itself was intact, battery at 43%, no physical damage. The screensaver showed a photo of Connor with what was presumably his girlfriend, both of them grinning at the camera, Monument Valley visible in the background. The last photos in his gallery were time-stamped 2 days ago, July 23, 2015, between 2:17 p.m. and 2:43 p.m. Standard tourist shots, the view from the rim, a particularly photogenic arch, a collared lizard sunning itself on red rock. But the metadata told a different story. According to the GPS information embedded in each photo, Connor had somehow been at coordinates 38.1567 again, 109.9234 W, near Ernie's country, then jumped to 38.1892 again, 110,001 W, roughly 4 miles northwest near the land of Standing Rocks, then back to 38,001.23 again, 109.9567 degree W, south of his original position, all within the span of 26 minutes. Phone malfunction, Lisa had told Superintendent Richardson during the morning briefing. GPS errors are common down there. The canyon walls, the magnetite in the rock formations, solar radiation at this elevation. Any number of environmental factors could corrupt the data. Richardson, a bureaucrat who'd transferred from Yellowstone and still seemed perpetually surprised that deserts could be dangerous, had nodded with visible relief. So we're looking at a standard lost hiker scenario. He got disoriented, wandered off trail, probably holed up in some shade somewhere waiting for rescue. Probably, Lisa had agreed, though the word tasted like a lie. Now, driving the rough dirt road toward the maze overlook trailhead in her Park Service Ford F-150, Lisa replayed the morning's briefing in her head and cataloged all the things she hadn't mentioned. Like the fact that Connor's last text message, sent to his girlfriend Katie at 2:51 p.m. read, "Something's following me. Not sure what. We'll call when I get back to truck." No call had followed. No further texts. Like the fact that the climbing party who'd found Connor's phone reported hearing screaming the night before. Human screaming, they'd said, but wrong somehow. One of them, a guy named Derek from Moab with 15 years of desert experience, had gone pale when describing it. It sounded like someone was being killed, he'd said, but it kept stopping and starting again like... He'd paused, clearly uncomfortable. Like whatever was making the sound kept forgetting how humans scream. Like the fact that Lisa had worked in the Maze District for 7 years and had never, not once, seen the ravens behave the way they were behaving now. Normally, the big black birds were everywhere, scavenging campsites, riding thermals above the canyons, their hoarse calls echoing off the rock walls. This morning, the sky was empty. No ravens, no hawks, no vultures. Nothing flew over the maze. Lisa reached the trailhead at 10:47 a.m., the temperature already approaching 95 degrees. She'd packed 6 liters of water, satellite phone, first aid kit, emergency beacon, topographic maps, compass, 2 GPS units, 1 handheld Garmin, 1 phone-based as backup, protein bars, electrolyte tablets, space blanket, and her Glock 22 service weapon. Standard SAR loadout for a solo preliminary survey before the full search team mobilized tomorrow morning. The trail descended immediately into a narrow canyon, the Navajo sandstone rising 200 feet on either side, stained in horizontal bands of red, orange, and cream. Lisa's boots crunched on cryptobiotic soil, the delicate living crust that took decades to form and seconds to destroy. She stepped carefully, staying on the established route, following cairns that previous hikers had stacked to mark the way. The maze had earned its name honestly, unlike the dramatic vertical drops and soaring walls of the more famous Utah parks. This was a horizontal labyrinth, a sprawling network of canyons that branched and rejoined in patterns that defied intuitive navigation. You could be 20 feet from your destination and take an hour to reach it, following the twisting passages through rock that had been carved by ancient rivers and shaped by 200 million years of wind and weather. The Navajo people had stories about places like this. Lisa had heard some of them from Ben Yazzie, a local guide who occasionally worked with the Park Service on cultural resource surveys. Stories about the Yinald Lushi, literally translated as, "With it, he goes on all fours," though most people used the English corruption, skinwalker. Navajo witches who'd gained the power to transform into animals by violating the worst taboos of their culture. They could become coyotes, wolves, bears, owls, crows, any creature they chose wearing the animal's skin and assuming its shape. Ben had been careful how he discussed it, the way people were when talking about things they actually feared rather than just found interesting. "We don't talk about them much," he'd said. "Talking about them can draw their attention. But you should know, there are places out here where traditional people won't go, especially after dark." The old ones knew which canyons were safe and which belonged to other things. Lisa had nodded politely, the way she nodded at all the folklore and superstition that tourists and locals love to share. She had a graduate degree in environmental science from the University of Utah. She understood geology, ecology, hydrology, climate science. She could explain why certain rock formations looked like faces, pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns, why people reported hearing voices in the canyons, acoustic effects and wind patterns, why hikers sometimes felt watched in remote areas, evolutionary adaptation, the hypervigilance that kept our ancestors alive. She didn't believe in witches who could turn into animals. She believed in people who got lost, panicked, made bad decisions, and sometimes died as a result of their own poor judgment. Connor Burke's trail, according to the GPS data from his phone, had led toward a section of the maze called the Fins, a series of narrow sandstone ridges separated by deep slots that created a formation resembling massive stone fingers reaching toward the sky. Lisa reached the area by early afternoon. The sun directly overhead, her shadow compressed to a small dark pool at her feet. The heat was extraordinary even by July standards. The rock radiated warmth like an oven, baking the air until it shimmered and distorted distant features. Lisa drank water methodically, monitoring her hydration, calculating distances and safe return times. She'd found no trace of Connor Burke. No footprints in the sandy washes, no disturbed cairns, no dropped equipment, nothing. What she did find, at approximately 2:30 p.m., was a set of tracks. They started in a patch of sand at the bottom of a wash, clear and distinct. Boot prints, men's size 10 or 11, tread pattern consistent with Morel hiking boots. The same brand Connor had been wearing according to the description his girlfriend provided. The prints moved up the wash for perhaps 30 yards, then stopped at a section of bare slick rock where tracks wouldn't register. Lisa followed the trajectory across the rock, looking for where the prints would resume on the other side. Instead, she found something else. Paw prints. Canine, larger than a coyote. Spacing and gait consistent with a wolf, though wolves had been extirpated from this region decades ago. The prints began exactly where Connor's boot tracks had ended, as if he'd taken one step as a human and the next as an animal. Lisa crouched down, examining the prints more closely. Clear pad marks, 4 toes plus dew claw, compressed sand showing the distribution of weight. She pulled out her phone and took photos, documenting the scene with professional thoroughness while her rational mind spun explanations. Coincidence. 2 different individuals, one human and one animal, happening to use the same route. The boot prints ending at the rock wasn't unusual. That's what slick rock meant, smooth stone where tracks didn't show. The animal print starting on the other side was simply where another creature, following the same natural corridor through the canyon, had left traces. Except the spacing was wrong. The canine prints maintained the same stride length as the human prints, roughly 30 inches the walking pace of an adult man. Wolves, even large ones, had a natural gait that produced 18 to 24 inches between prints. These were too wide apart, as if whatever made them was walking upright on 2 legs, setting down paws instead of feet. Lisa felt something cold move through her stomach. Not fear exactly, but a kind of cognitive dissonance, her brain refusing to process what her eyes were showing her. She stood up, checked her GPS, functioning normally, coordinates consistent with her map position, and continued following the tracks. They led deeper into the Fins, winding between the narrow sandstone ridges. The shadows lengthened as the afternoon progressed, the sun's angle creating strange contrasts between light and dark. Lisa kept her eyes on the ground, documenting the tracks with photos, making notes in her field book. The prints changed. Coyote for a while, smaller and more delicate. Then something that looked like a deer, 2-toed hoof prints replacing the paws. Then back to boots. Human boots, but smaller than Connor's, women's size 7 or 8. Then bare human feet. Then something Lisa couldn't identify at all. Three-toed, deep impressions suggesting significant weight, spaced 4 feet apart. Lisa stopped walking. Her heart rate had increased, she noticed clinically. Elevated respiration, adrenaline response, fight or flight activation. Her rational mind cataloged these symptoms while simultaneously trying to construct explanations for what she was documenting. Multiple individuals, a group of hikers, some with boots, some foolish enough to go barefoot. The animal tracks were unrelated coincidences. The 3-toed prints were, what? A bird? Sandhill cranes occasionally wandered through this region. Their tracks could measure 5 or 6 inches. But these were 12 inches long, pressed deep into sand that should barely hold an impression. "This is stupid," Lisa said aloud, her voice strange in the silence. No echo came back. The fins absorbed sound rather than reflecting it, some acoustic property of the stone formations. She checked her watch. 4:15 p.m. She should turn back. She'd established that Connor Burke had entered this area, documented unusual tracks that suggested nothing conclusive. Her mind insisted firmly. Suggested several people and animals had used this route. Tomorrow the full SAR team would arrive. They'd do a systematic grid search. They'd find him sheltering in some alcove, dehydrated but alive. And this would become another story about a stupid tourist who didn't respect the desert. Except Connor's text message said something was following him. And the tracks kept changing. And the ravens had abandoned the sky. Lisa pulled out her satellite phone to call in her position and findings. The device showed full power, clear line of sight to satellites. But when she tried to initiate the call, nothing happened. The screen displayed connecting for 30 seconds, then error, signal lost. She tried again. Same result. She checked her cell phone. No bars, which was expected this deep in the maze, but also a strange notification she'd never seen before. Network time sync failed. The clock was blinking, unable to determine the correct time. She looked at her watch, a reliable mechanical Seiko, no batteries or electronics to malfunction. It showed 4:17 p.m., the second hand sweeping smoothly around the dial. When she looked at her phone again, the clock had reset itself to 2:43 p.m., the same timestamp as Connor Burke's last photo. Lisa's scientific mind, her rational, educated, skeptical mind, began constructing elaborate explanations involving electromagnetic interference and unusual geological formations. But underneath those explanations, something older and more primal was screaming at her to run. She heard the voice instead. Lisa. Her own voice calling her own name. "Lisa, where are you? I need help." The sound came from deeper in the fins, from the shadowed places between the stone ridges. Lisa froze, every muscle locked. The voice was perfect. Exactly her pitch, her inflection, even the slight Utah accent she'd picked up after 7 years. If she'd heard a recording of herself speaking those words, she wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. "Lisa, please, I'm hurt. I can't find the trail." Still her voice, still perfect. But she hadn't spoken those words. She was standing silent, her hand clenched around the useless satellite phone, her breathing shallow and fast. Something moved in the shadows ahead, a figure roughly human-shaped staying just beyond the direct sunlight. Lisa's hand moved to her holster, fingers closing around the Glock's grip. "Who's there?" Her voice now, really hers, and she heard how it trembled. "Lisa, it's me." Not her voice anymore. Connor Burke's voice, young and frightened. "Please help me. I've been lost for days. There's something out here. Something that keeps changing." Lisa drew her weapon, assuming a ready position but not yet aiming at the shadowed figure. "Connor Burke, step into the light where I can see you." The figure moved, but not toward the light. It seemed to flow from one shadow to another, staying in the dark places. And Lisa caught only glimpses. Something lean and wrong, moving on 4 legs but articulated like human limbs. "I can't," Connor's voice said. "The sun hurts now. It burns my skin. But I can show you what I found. I can show you why the Navajo don't come here. Why even the animals stay away. Show yourself or I will consider you a threat." Lisa's training, the protocols drilled into her at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, gave her something to hold on to. Clear commands, established procedures, the familiar weight of the Glock in her hand. The figure laughed, and the laugh wasn't Connor's or Lisa's or human at all. It was a sound like wind through hollow bone, like the scraping of claws on stone. When it spoke again, it used her voice. You don't believe in threats you can't explain. You believe in geology and hydrology and rational scientific processes. But tell me, Lisa Hoffman. The thing said her full name, which she'd never spoken to Connor Burke, had never mentioned in any report or transmission. How do you explain me? It stepped into the light. For a moment, Lisa's eyes refused to process what they showed her. The thing wore Connor Burke's face, or a version of it, stretched over a skull that was subtly wrong in its proportions. It stood upright on two legs, but its knees bent backward, the joints articulated like a bird's or a dinosaur's. Its hands had too many fingers, each tipped with what looked like chipped obsidian. And its eyes were coyote eyes, amber and reflective, pupils dilated despite the bright sunlight. Lisa fired. 3 shots, center mass, exactly as trained. The reports echoed off the canyon walls, finally finding sound that would reflect the crack, crack, crack bouncing and multiplying until it sounded like a dozen guns firing. The thing jerked backward with each impact, dark fluid spattering the sandstone behind it. Then it looked down at its chest where the bullets had struck, cocked its head at an angle no human neck could achieve, and smiled with too many teeth. You can't kill what was never properly alive, it said in Lisa's voice. We're the price, you see, the cost of the power. We violated every sacred law, broke every taboo, unmade ourselves to gain the ability to unmake our forms. We're not spirits or demons or any supernatural thing. We're human, or we were. We're just human beings who chose to become something else. Lisa's finger tightened on the trigger again, but before she could fire, the thing changed. Its form blurred and collapsed, folding in on itself, and suddenly a coyote stood where the human thing had been. Not a wolf, not something strange, a normal coyote, maybe 35 pounds, tan coat, bushy tail. It sat on its haunches and regarded her with those amber eyes. Then it spoke in Connor Burke's voice. I'm still alive, you know. The real me. What's left of me. I'm buried in one of the caves, about a mile from here. I can feel myself changing, feel my thoughts dissolving. Soon I'll be like him. The coyote nodded toward the shadows where other figures now stood, half visible. Just hunger and shape-shifting, and the desire to make others understand what I've become. The coyote stood and trotted toward the shadows. Before it reached them, it transformed again. A raven, though ravens hadn't flown over the maze all day, wings spreading as it launched into the air. Lisa fired at the flying shape. Missed. The raven circled once, twice, its call echoing. Run, Lisa. Run while you're still entirely yourself. Then it disappeared beyond the stone fins and Lisa was alone in the silence. She ran. Back through the twisting canyons, following her GPS track, her lungs burning in the superheated air. The shadows lengthened as the sun descended toward the western horizon, darkness pooling in the low places. Lisa's rational mind had fled entirely, leaving only instinct and terror. Behind her, or ahead of her, or beside her, she couldn't tell. She heard movement. Footsteps that matched her pace. Her own breathing replicated by something that didn't need to breathe. Her phone rang. Impossible, no signal out here, but it rang, and she pulled it from her pocket without stopping, without thinking. Hello? Her voice. Hello? Connor's voice on the other end. Who is this? This is Ranger Lisa Hoffman, Canyonlands National Park. Who am I speaking to? This is Connor Burke. I'm lost in the maze. I need help. Connor, this is... She stopped running, stood gasping in a patch of sand between towering walls. This is the same phone. Your phone. I'm holding your phone. That's impossible, Connor's voice said from the speaker. I have my phone. I'm looking at it right now. How are you calling me on my own phone? Lisa looked at the device in her hand. The screen showed an active call to Connor Burke's number, the same number this phone was registered to. She was calling Connor Burke's phone from Connor Burke's phone. "What's happening?" she whispered. "You're beginning to understand," said her own voice from the speaker. "You're beginning to see that the categories you use to make sense of the world, human and animal, living and dead, self and other, are more fluid than you believed. We're proof, Lisa. Walking, talking proof that identity is just a skin you wear." She threw the phone. It clattered off the canyon wall and landed in the sand, still connected, still transmitting sound. Multiple voices now, layered over each other. Her voice, Connor's voice, voices she didn't recognize, animal sounds that formed words. Lisa ran until her legs gave out, until she collapsed in the sand, gasping and retching, her vision spotted with black dots. The sun touched the western rim of the canyon, and the temperature immediately began to drop. Desert nights were cold, sometimes 40 or 50 degrees cooler than the day. She needed to set up an emergency camp, needed to signal her position, needed to what? Go back to the trailhead and explain what she'd seen? File a report describing a thing that wore Connor Burke's face and spoke with her voice? Tell Superintendent Richardson that she'd encountered a skinwalker, an actual literal Navajo witch who could change shape? They'd pull her from field duty. Mandatory psychological evaluation. Possible medical leave. The rational, scientific, skeptical ranger who didn't believe in stupid superstitions had seen something impossible and lost her mind. Except she hadn't lost her mind. She knew with absolute certainty that what she'd experienced was real. The thing in the canyon, the changing tracks, the voices, all of it was real, which meant her entire understanding of reality was wrong. Lisa laughed, a sound that bordered on hysteria. All her education, her degrees, her 7 years of experience explaining natural phenomena to tourists, all of it was inadequate to process what she'd witnessed. The scientific method required observation, hypothesis, testing. But how did you test something that violated the fundamental laws of biology and physics? How did you observe a creature that could be anything, anyone? "You can't," said a voice behind her. Lisa spun, raising her Glock. A woman stood there, maybe 50 years old, Navajo by her features, wearing modern hiking clothes and carrying a pack. She held up her hands, showing they were empty. "Peace," the woman said. "I'm real, human. My name is Grace Begay. I'm a traditional practitioner, sometimes called a medicine woman, though that's not exactly accurate. Ben Yazzie called me, said you were doing a search in the maze, said I should probably come out here just in case." "Just in case of what?" "Just in case you found what you found." Grace lowered her hands slowly. "The Yi-Nald Lushi, the skinwalker. Though that's a terrible translation, it makes them sound like creatures of legend when they're much worse. They're human beings who chose power over everything else, who studied the darkest parts of our traditions and twisted them into something obscene." Lisa's hands trembled, the Glock wavering. "That's impossible. People can't change shape. Biology doesn't work that way." "Your biology doesn't work that way," Grace said quietly. "But they've made themselves into something else. Through ritual, through the violation of every taboo, through consuming things that should never be consumed." She paused, clearly uncomfortable. "They remake themselves. Not all the way. Never all the way. That's why they're dangerous. They're caught between forms, between human and animal, and something else entirely. And being caught like that, unable to be fully anything, it drives them mad with hunger. Hunger for identity, for wholeness." "Connor Burke," Lisa said. "The man I was searching for, is he? Probably gone by now, probably transforming. The process takes a few days usually. By the time you find him, if you find him, he won't be who he was." Grace pulled something from her pocket, a small bundle wrapped in red cloth. "This is why I came. To give you this. Protection. It won't kill them, but it will keep them from getting too close, from taking your form." "I don't believe in—" Lisa stopped, laughed again, that borderline hysterical sound. "I was going to say, I don't believe in magic, but I just watched a man turn into a coyote, turn into a raven. So apparently I believe in anything now. That's a dangerous place to be, Grace said seriously. Belief without understanding. The Yi Nald Lushi want you to doubt everything, to lose your sense of what's real. That's how they work. They dissolve boundaries, make you question your own identity. Pretty soon you don't know if you're you or if you're something else wearing your face. Lisa took the red bundle, unwrapped it. Inside was a mixture of what looked like ash and dried herbs, along with a small piece of turquoise on a leather cord. Wear the turquoise, Grace instructed. Sprinkle the ash mixture around your camp tonight. It's made from specific plants, blessed by specific prayers. It creates a boundary. They can't cross it, can't take the form of anything inside it. This is insane, Lisa said, but she tied the leather cord around her neck. 3 hours ago, I would have laughed at this. Now I'm wearing a magic necklace because a shape-shifting witch might steal my identity. The world is bigger and stranger than your education prepared you for, Grace said. The Navajo have known about Yi Nald Lushi for centuries. Every culture has their version. Skin changers, shapeshifters, creatures, all describing the same essential phenomenon. Human beings who sacrifice their humanity for power. And you can't kill them? Not easily. They're already dead in the ways that matter. You'd have to destroy the body completely. Fire usually works, though it has to be hot enough to consume bone. Or you'd have to know their true name, the name they had before transformation. Speaking that name binds them, forces them back into their original form where they're vulnerable. Lisa looked at the turquoise stone resting against her chest. Connor Burke. That's his name. His true name. Grace nodded slowly. Then you have a weapon. But you'd have to get close enough to speak it, and they'll do everything they can to prevent that. They'll use his voice against you, wear his face, make you doubt whether you're trying to save him or destroy him. I have to try, Lisa said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. He's lost out here. He's transforming into that thing. I can't just leave him. He texted his girlfriend that something was following him. That was 2 days ago. The transformation usually takes 3 days, which means I have maybe 24 hours before he's gone completely. Lisa stood up, ignoring the protests from her exhausted legs. Where would they take him? Where would he be? Grace looked toward the darkening eastern sky. Skinwalkers are drawn to the liminal places, boundaries, thresholds, the spaces between things. In landscape terms, that means caves, arches, places where stone meets sky or earth meets water. There's a cave system about a mile northeast of here, part of an old uranium mine that collapsed in the 1960s. Traditional people avoid it. Say it's a place where the boundaries are thin. Can you take me there? No, Grace said firmly. I can protect myself, maintain my boundaries, but I'm not a warrior. I'm a healer. What you're proposing, confronting a Yi Nald Lushi in its own territory, trying to speak its name and force transformation, that's combat, not medicine. You'll have to go alone. Great, Lisa said flatly. That's great, really reassuring. Grace almost smiled. You're a ranger. You're trained for dangerous situations. And unlike most people who encounter the Yi Nald Lushi, you have weapons that might actually work. Not just the physical ones. She nodded at Lisa's Glock, though bullets dipped in white ash can sometimes hurt them. But your skepticism, your scientific mind, that's armor. You don't believe easily, which means they'll have a harder time making you doubt yourself. My skepticism failed pretty spectacularly about 2 hours ago. No, Grace said. You saw something impossible and adjusted your worldview to accommodate new evidence. That's not failure. That's the scientific method working exactly as it should. You observed, you questioned, you're forming new hypotheses. The fact that those hypotheses include shape-shifting witches doesn't make them less scientific. Lisa wanted to argue but found she couldn't. Grace was right. The core of scientific thinking wasn't rejecting the strange or unusual. It was following the evidence wherever it led. And the evidence had led her here. to a Navajo medicine woman offering magical protection against a creature that shouldn't exist. "Tell me how to find the cave," Lisa said. Grace gave her precise directions, northeast bearing, specific rock formations to use as landmarks, a distinctive arch that marked the entrance. "The cave goes deep," she warned. "The old uranium miners followed natural passages, expanded them in places. It's a maze within a maze, you could get lost. I have light, GPS, marking supplies, I'll manage. The Yi Nald Lushi will try to separate you from yourself. They'll speak with your voice, show you your face, make you question which one is real. Remember, you are the one wearing the turquoise. You are the one who walked into that cave knowing the danger. They can imitate you, but they can't be you. And if I find Connor Burke, if he's still partially human..." Grace's expression turned sad. "Then you speak his name. You force him to remember who he was, and you pray that there's enough of him left to fight the transformation. But Lisa..." She caught Lisa's arm as the ranger turned to leave. "If he's too far gone, if the humanity is already consumed, then you run. You don't try to save him. You don't try to redeem him. You run, and you let the desert claim him." "I'm a ranger," Lisa said quietly. "I don't leave people behind. He's not people anymore. Not really. That's the point. That's what they sacrifice. And if you forget that, if you let empathy override survival instinct, you'll end up like him, neither human nor animal, hungry and confused and lost." Lisa pulled free from Grace's grip. "I'll keep that in mind." She left the medicine woman standing in the gathering darkness and headed northeast, toward the place where boundaries were thin and things that shouldn't exist waited in the deep caves. The turquoise felt heavy against her chest. The Glock felt inadequate in her hand, but she kept walking because that's what rangers did. They went into the dangerous places, the remote places, the places where people got lost and needed help, even if the person needing help wasn't quite a person anymore. The arch Grace described rose from the sandstone like a frozen wave, maybe 40 feet high, illuminated by the last rays of sunset. The cave entrance beneath it was a vertical crack, barely 3 feet wide, darkness pooling inside like water. Lisa clicked on her flashlight, a powerful LED streamlight, 1,000 lumens, able to cut through darkness like a blade. The beam showed rough stone walls, a descending passage, old mining equipment rusted and abandoned. She sprinkled some of Grace's ash mixture around the entrance, creating a boundary she hoped would function as fallback protection. Then she squeezed through the crack and entered the cave. The temperature dropped immediately, the stone holding on to winter cold despite the summer heat outside. Lisa's breath misted in the flashlight beam. The passage descended steeply, requiring her to brace against the walls to prevent sliding. Old rail tracks, probably from ore carts, ran along the floor, half buried in rock debris. "Connor Burke?" Lisa's voice echoed strangely, the sound dampened and flattened. "Connor, if you're here, I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help." Silence. Then, from somewhere deeper in the cave, a voice. "Help?" Her own voice laughing. "How can you help when you don't understand what's happening? When your categories and classifications don't apply?" Lisa kept moving forward, her flashlight sweeping across stone walls covered in uranium prospecting marks from the 1950s. "Connor Burke," she said firmly, speaking the name like Grace had instructed. "Connor Burke from Boulder, Colorado, who came to Canyonlands to hike and photograph the desert. That's who you are. That's your name." The laugh came again, echoing from multiple directions. "Names are just more skins we wear. He was Connor Burke. Then he violated the boundary. He ate the flesh he shouldn't have eaten, spoke the words he shouldn't have spoken. Now he's becoming Yi Nald Lushi. Soon he'll be able to wear any skin, speak any voice." Lisa's flashlight caught movement. A figure deeper in the cave, human-shaped, but wrong. She raised her Glock. "Show yourself." The figure stepped into the light. It wore Connor Burke's face, his clothes, his body. Perfect mimicry. But the eyes were all wrong. Too reflective, catching the flashlight beam and throwing it back like an animal's eyeshine. "I'm Connor Burke," it said in Connor's voice. I'm the hiker you're searching for. Please help me. I don't know what's happening to me. Lisa's finger tightened on the trigger. Prove it. Tell me something only Connor would know. I came here to propose to my girlfriend, the thing said. Katie, I have a ring in my backpack. I was going to ask her at sunrise on the rim of the canyon, but something went wrong. Something followed me, and now I'm... It looked down at its hands. I'm changing. I can feel it. I can feel myself dissolving. The details were too perfect, the emotional beat too authentic. Lisa felt doubt creep in. What if this was Connor? What if he was still mostly human, still capable of being saved? Connor Burke, she said, testing the name. The figure flinched as if struck. Don't, it said, please don't. The name hurts. It's like being reminded of something I've lost, something I can never be again. Because you're not Connor Burke anymore, Lisa said, her voice steadier than she felt. You're what's replacing him, the Yi-Nald Lushi that's consuming his identity. The figure's expression shifted. Grief, rage, hunger, all flickering across its stolen face. He invited me in, it said, dropping the pretense. Not intentionally, but he was so hungry, so thirsty, so desperate. When I offered him meat from something I'd killed, fresh meat still warm, he didn't ask what animal it came from. He just ate. And that was permission enough. Permission for what? For me to begin the transformation, to make him one of us. The thing that wore Connor Burke's face stepped closer. You know what the worst part is? He wanted it. Deep down, beneath the civilized veneer, he wanted the power. Wanted to be more than human, stronger, faster, able to survive anything. We don't force people to become Yi-Nald Lushi. We just offer them a choice, and they choose the power every time. No, Lisa said. People don't want to become monsters. Don't they? The thing smiled with Connor's mouth. You've been a ranger for 7 years. How many times have you watched people destroy beautiful places because they wanted a souvenir, wanted the perfect photo, wanted to prove they'd conquered something? How many times have you seen humans consume and destroy without thought for consequence? We're just more honest about what we are. We're human appetite stripped of pretense, human hunger made manifest. Lisa fired. The bullet caught the thing in the shoulder, spinning it around. It laughed, dark fluid staining Connor's shirt. You're just feeding me now. Every wound, every drop of blood, it's all fuel for the transformation. You can't stop what's already begun. Connor Burke, Lisa said again, louder this time. Connor Burke from Boulder, son of Patricia and David Burke, graduate of Colorado State University, employed by a software company called Apex Digital. That's who you are. That's the name you were born with. The thing screamed, not Connor's voice anymore, but something between human and animal, a sound of rage and pain. Its form blurred, shifting, human to coyote to something else entirely, a chimera of mismatched parts. Stop saying that name, it howled. That person is dead. He died when he ate the forbidden meat, when he spoke the words I taught him. There's only me now, only the hunger. No, said another voice. Connor's voice, weak and distant, coming from deeper in the cave. No, she's right, I'm still here, some of me is still here. Lisa moved toward the voice, keeping her gun trained on the shifting thing. Her flashlight beam found another figure, this one human, fully human, wearing Connor Burke's face but somehow more real, more solid. He sat against the cave wall, his arms wrapped around his knees, shaking. I ate the meat, this Connor said, tears streaming down his face. I was so hungry and it offered me food, and I didn't ask what it was. And then I could feel it. Something else inside me. Something that wanted to unmake me, reshape me. I've been fighting it for 2 days, trying to stay human, trying to remember who I am. 2 Connors, Lisa said quietly. Which one is real? Both, said the shifting thing. Neither. That's the point. The boundary is dissolving. Soon there will be no distinction between what he was and what I am. We'll be merged, unified, one being with many forms. Lisa looked at the human Connor, the one who was crying and shaking, looked at the shifting thing that wore his face, tried to determine which was the truth and which was the lie. "Connor Burke," she said, speaking to the human figure. "Tell me about Katie. Tell me about the ring." The human Connor looked up, his eyes, normal human eyes, no reflection, meeting hers. "Katie Chen. We met 3 years ago at a rock climbing gym in Boulder. The ring is white gold with a small diamond. Nothing fancy because she doesn't like ostentation. I was going to propose at sunrise on the rim of the Grand View Point overlook. I have the ring in my pocket right now. Show me." Connor reached into his jacket pocket, moving slowly, aware of the gun Lisa held, and pulled out a small velvet box. Opened it to reveal a modest ring, exactly as described. The shifting thing laughed. "Very convincing, but I could have taken that from his body. I could be wearing his corpse like a suit, using his memories to speak his words. How do you know which of us is the real Connor Burke?" Lisa felt the weight of the decision crushing down on her. She was a ranger, not a detective or a mystic. She understood ecology and geology, not identity and transformation. How was she supposed to determine which of these two figures was human and which was monster? Then she remembered Grace's words. "You are the one wearing the turquoise. You are the one who walked into this cave knowing the danger." "Connor Burke," Lisa said, addressing the human figure. "Do you want to be saved?" He met her eyes. "Yes. God, yes. I want to go home. I want to marry Katie. I want to forget I ever came to this terrible place." "That's the wrong answer," Lisa said quietly. Connor's expression changed. Confusion, then understanding, then rage. The human form collapsed, revealing the shifting thing underneath. It lunged at her, multiple limbs extending, mouths opening in several places at once. Lisa spoke the name, Connor Burke. The thing froze mid-lunge, screamed. Its form locked, caught between shapes, unable to complete the transformation or reverse it. Lisa pulled the turquoise from around her neck and pressed it against what might have been the creature's forehead. "Connor Burke didn't want to be saved," Lisa said, understanding now. "He wanted the power. He ate the forbidden meat knowing what it was. He spoke the words willingly. The Connor Burke I met in Boulder died the moment he made that choice. What's left is you. The Yi Naldlushi, the Skinwalker, the thing he chose to become." The creature made a sound like breaking glass, its form fragmenting. "He invited me," it whispered. "He said yes." "I know," Lisa said. "That's why I can't save him. That's why the only mercy I can offer is this." She pulled out Grace's ash mixture and scattered it over the frozen creature. It began to burn, not with normal fire, but with that same cold blue-white flame she'd seen briefly in the canyon. The creature's screams faded to silence. Its many forms collapsed into ash. And when the burning was complete, nothing remained except a small pile of gray powder and Connor Burke's hiking boots. Lisa picked up the velvet ring box, closed it gently, and put it in her pocket. She'd return it to Katie Chen somehow. She'd tell her, what? That Connor had died in the desert, that his body hadn't been recovered? All true in a sense, just not the whole truth. She made her way back through the cave, following her light to the entrance. Outside, the sun was rising, turning the sandstone gold and red. Grace Begay waited near the arch. "Did you find him?" Grace asked. "I found what was left of him," Lisa said. "It wasn't enough to save." Grace nodded, unsurprised. "Most people who encounter the Yi Naldlushi don't survive. The fact that you did says something about your strength. I don't feel strong. I feel like my entire worldview was shattered and badly reassembled. That's what truth does sometimes. It breaks your comfortable illusions." Grace handed Lisa a bottle of water. "You'll need to file a report eventually. What will you say?" "The truth," Lisa said. "That Connor Burke died in the wilderness. That I recovered his personal effects. that the body was unrecoverable due to terrain and environmental factors. All true, just not complete. And the rest? The transformation? The Yi Nald Lushi, the cave? Lisa looked at the turquoise stone in her hand. I'll keep that to myself. Add it to the category of things that happened but can't be explained in official reports, like UFO sightings or ghost stories or, she laughed without humor, Navajo witches who can change their shape. You've changed too, Grace said quietly. You went into that cave as one person and came out as another. That's transformation of a different kind. But unlike the Yi Nald Lushi, you chose wisdom over power. Lisa didn't feel particularly wise. She felt exhausted and traumatized and deeply uncertain about the nature of reality. But she also felt something else, a recognition that the world was larger and stranger than she'd believed, and that maybe that was okay. Maybe certainty was overrated. Maybe the scientific mind required flexibility, the willingness to revise models based on new evidence, even when that evidence included impossible things. She spent the rest of the day hiking back to her truck, documenting the terrain, marking locations on her GPS. The ravens had returned, their calls echoing off the canyon walls. The heat built as the sun climbed. Everything seemed normal, natural, explainable. Except Lisa knew better now. She knew that beneath the surface explanations, beneath the geology and ecology and rational scientific frameworks, there were deeper patterns. Human choices that led to inhuman consequences. Boundaries that could be crossed but not uncrossed. Transformations that consumed identity and left nothing but hunger behind. She filed her report 3 days later. Connor Burke was declared lost, presumed dead. His girlfriend Katie Chen flew in from Boulder to claim his personal effects. Clothes, backpack, camera equipment, and a small velvet box containing a ring that would never be given. Lisa returned to her duties as a ranger in the Maze District. She explained natural phenomena to tourists, guided occasional search and rescue operations, monitored weather and trail conditions. Everything normal, everything rational. But she wore the turquoise stone on its leather cord, hidden beneath her uniform. And when she walked the canyons alone, especially at dawn or dusk when boundaries were thinnest, she listened to the sounds around her with new awareness. The rustle of wind through sage might be just wind. The glimpse of movement might be just a coyote. The sense of being watched might be just evolutionary hypervigilance. Or it might be something else. Something that had once been human and chose to become other. Something that walked in the liminal spaces, hungry and hunting and wearing whatever face served its needs. Lisa Hoffman, who hadn't believed in evil but believed in stupid, now understood that some choices were worse than stupid. Some choices unmade you entirely. And the desert, beautiful, harsh, ancient, remembered those choices long after the people who made them were gone. The ravens remembered too, flying over the maze, calling warnings in voices that almost sounded human. Almost, but not quite. The difference mattered. The boundary mattered. And Lisa, walking the line between rational skepticism and terrible knowledge, understood that some truths were worth the cost of certainty. Even if that cost was everything you thought you knew about the world, hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Thomas O'Brien found his son's glove frozen to a geyser vent at dawn. The leather charred black on one side, crusted with ice on the other, and when he picked it up, the fingers inside crumbled like ash. Connor had been missing for 19 hours. 19 hours in Yellowstone winter, where the temperature had dropped to negative 23 degrees Fahrenheit overnight, where wind chill could strip flesh from bone in minutes, where hypothermia turned thoughts sluggish and stupid before dragging you into sleep that became death. Thomas stood in the sulfur-stinking steam rising from the porcelain basin, holding what remained of his son's glove, and felt something crack inside his chest that had nothing to do with the cold. Connor was 16 years old, and Thomas had let him come on this winter camping trip because his ex-wife Sarah had said their son needed male bonding, needed to understand that divorce didn't mean abandonment, needed his father to actually be present for once instead of married to his job as a park ranger. And now Connor was gone. The glove had been here all night, frozen to superheated stone, existing in that impossible state between burning and freezing that only Yellowstone's geothermal features could create. Thomas had searched this area 3 times in the dark with his headlamp. He'd walked within 10 feet of this spot. He'd somehow missed it. Or it hadn't been here. The thought tried to surface, but Thomas shoved it down. Shock did strange things to memory. Panic made you miss obvious details. That was all. He triggered his radio with fingers gone numb despite his insulated gloves. "Base, this is O'Brien. I found evidence at Porcelain Basin, Connor's glove. Requesting immediate search team deployment to this location." Static crackled. Then, "Copy that, Thomas. Teams are mobilizing now. ETA 20 minutes. A pause. "How's the glove look?" Thomas stared at the charred, frozen thing in his hand. At what had been inside the fingers. Not flesh, because flesh didn't crumble like that. Not bone, because bone didn't turn to powder when touched. Something else. Something that had been burned and frozen simultaneously until it stopped being anything recognizable. "Damaged," he said finally. "Badly damaged." He'd brought Connor to Yellowstone in mid-January because the park was nearly empty in winter. 99% of visitors came between May and September. Winter meant solitude, meant experiencing the park as it had existed before roads and lodges and tourists, meant quality time with his son without distractions. They'd camped at Norris Geyser Basin, in the backcountry site Thomas had permits for. They'd set up their cold-weather tent, gathered deadfall for a fire, cooked freeze-dried meals that tasted like cardboard but provided calories. Connor had complained about the cold, about the lack of cell service, about missing his friends, but he'd also smiled when they saw a herd of bison moving through steam from the hot springs, their massive bodies ghostly in the fog. He'd laughed when Thomas told stories about rescuing unprepared hikers. They'd connected. Finally, after 2 years of divorce and custody arrangements and missed weekends, they'd connected. Then Connor had left the tent at 300 hours to pee. Thomas had heard the zipper, had registered his son's departure in that half-aware state between sleep and waking. He'd expected Connor to return in a minute, maybe 2. When 5 minutes passed, Thomas had put on his boots and jacket and gone outside. The tent sat alone in a clearing surrounded by dead lodgepole pines, victims of the 1988 fires that had burned 40% of the park. The snow was trampled around their campsite, but beyond that, it stretched unmarked and pristine under a moon so bright it cast shadows. Thomas's headlamp had swept across the landscape, finding nothing. He'd called Connor's name. Silence. He'd widened his search, following the only tracks he could find. His son's boots, clear and fresh powder, leading north toward the thermal features. The tracks had ended at the edge of the basin. Just ended. No sign of struggle, no indication of what had happened. One moment Connor was walking across the snow, and the next moment he simply ceased to exist. Thomas had searched through the night, had called in the emergency, had refused to rest while his son was out there somewhere in the killing cold. He'd operated on training and adrenaline, moving methodically through search patterns, checking the most dangerous areas first. The thermal pools where people could fall through thin crust into boiling acidic water, the ice-covered streams where someone could break through and drown, the ridges where exposure would kill fastest. Now with dawn breaking over the Gallatin Range and painting the steam vents in shades of gold and pink, Thomas held his son's destroyed glove and tried to understand what it meant. The search teams arrived in snowmobiles, their engines shattering the morning quiet. 6 rangers and volunteers, all experienced in winter SAR operations, all wearing the determined expressions of people who knew they were probably looking for a body, but would search as if the victim might still be alive. Chief Ranger Margaret Cole approached Thomas with careful sympathy in her eyes. She was 51, had worked Yellowstone for 26 years, had coordinated dozens of search and rescue operations. She knew what negative 23 degrees did to human tissue over 19 hours. "Thomas, you need to let the team handle this. You're too close. You've been up all night. We can't have you making mistakes out there." "He's my son, Maggie." "I know. That's exactly why you need to step back. Let us work." Thomas looked at the destroyed glove in his hand. Something about it bothered him beyond the obvious horror. The damage pattern was wrong. Fire scorched from the palm side, as if Connor had pressed his hand against something superheated. But the ice formation suggested prolonged exposure to extreme cold. Hours of freezing, not minutes. How could both happen simultaneously? The thermal features, Thomas said slowly. If he fell against a vent, got burned, then hypothermia set in. We'll check every possibility, Maggie interrupted gently. But Thomas, you know as well as I do what hypothermia does. It makes people confused. They take off their clothes thinking they're overheating. They crawl into small spaces, they make decisions that don't make sense. She gestured to the glove. Maybe he burned himself and panicked. Maybe he ran and got lost. We'll find him. But her tone said what her words didn't. They'd find a body. Nobody survived 19 hours in this cold. The search teams fanned out across Porcelain Basin, their movements professional and thorough. Thomas watched them work, his ranger training warring with paternal desperation. Protocol said he should return to base, should let the professionals handle the search, should trust the system he'd been part of for 12 years. Instead, he shouldered his pack and headed north, following an instinct he couldn't name. The landscape beyond Porcelain Basin was a study in contrasts. Dead forest gave way to active thermal areas where the earth itself was alive with heat and chemistry. Steam vents hissed like breathing. Fumaroles burped sulfurous gas. Hot springs created patches of bare ground surrounded by snowdrifts 6 feet deep. The snow here was crusty and dangerous, hiding holes where superheated water had melted through, creating traps that could swallow an unwary hiker. Thomas moved carefully, testing each step, his eyes scanning for any sign of his son. Tracks, fabric, blood, anything. He found the second glove 300 yards north of the first, wedged into a crack in the travertine formations. This one was intact, but stained dark with something that might have been blood or might have been mineral deposits from the hot springs. Thomas bagged it, marked the GPS coordinates, and kept moving. The wind picked up as he climbed higher, carrying voices. At first he thought the search team had circled around, but the voices came from the wrong direction. They echoed strangely through the thermal vents, sounding distant and close simultaneously. Thomas couldn't make out words, just tones, urgent, frightened, pleading. He followed the sound for 20 minutes before realizing the voices weren't moving. They seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, carried on wind and steam, distorted by geology and weather into something that might not have been voices at all. Just the park making sounds, the way it always did. Geysers erupting, steam venting, ice cracking. Nature had its own language, and humans were programmed to hear patterns in randomness, voices in noise. But one word kept repeating in the not voices, clear enough that Thomas stopped walking to listen. Father. His radio crackled. O'Brien, this is Cole. Report your position. Thomas looked at his GPS. He'd come almost 2 miles from Porcelain Basin, well beyond the search grid's boundary. I'm at elevation 7,847, coordinates 44.7348 north, 110.7125 west. Following a lead. What lead? Thomas, you're supposed to be at base. I found Connor's second glove and I'm hearing... He paused. What was he hearing? Definitely not voices. That was grief and exhaustion talking. I'm hearing thermal activity that might indicate new vents. Could be relevant to the search. Get back to the search grid now, that's an order. Thomas looked north, where the landscape rose toward the Washburn Range. Somewhere up there, the not voices were calling. Somewhere up there, his son might still be alive, might be calling for help, might be waiting for his father to find him. Copy that, he said, heading back now. He turned off his radio and kept climbing. The terrain became brutal. Snowdrifts gave way to exposed rock, wind scoured and slick with ice. Thomas's breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation searing his lungs with cold so intense it felt like inhaling broken glass. His face mask frosted over with condensation from his breath. His goggles fogged. Everything hurt. His feet, his hands, his chest, his head. But somewhere ahead Connor needed him. That thought kept Thomas moving when exhaustion said stop, when cold said lie down, when logic said this is how you die. He crested a ridge at 1347 hours and saw it. A structure, built from deadfall and elk bones, woven together with what looked like sinew or tendon, standing 12 feet tall in a clearing ringed by dead trees. The bones were massive, elk femurs, ribs, skulls with antlers still attached. They'd been arranged with deliberate artistry, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. The structure had an opening facing east, and inside, Thomas ran. He didn't think, didn't calculate risk, didn't consider that this might be a trap or hallucination or something his oxygen-starved brain had conjured. He just ran, slipping on ice, crashing through snow, racing toward the structure because he could see fabric inside. Red fabric, the color of Connor's jacket. "Connor!" His voice cracked with cold and fear. "Connor, I'm here." He reached the structure, dropped to his knees at the opening, looked inside. Connor sat against the back wall. His eyes were open. He was breathing. But something was wrong. His son had lost weight. Not pounds, but dozens of pounds. His face skeletal, his body emaciated in a way that should have taken weeks, not hours. His lips were blue. His fingernails were black. And his eyes were the wrong color. Not the brown Thomas remembered, but yellow. Predator yellow. "Dad?" Connor's voice was a rasp. "I'm so hungry." Thomas crawled into the structure, pulling emergency supplies from his pack. Thermal blanket, chemical heat packs, high-calorie energy bars. He wrapped his son in the blanket, activated heat packs, and pressed them against Connor's chest, hands, feet. "You're okay. I've got you. We're getting out of here." "Can't leave." Connor's teeth chattered. "It won't let me." "What won't let you?" "Connor, what happened?" "I had to pee. Left the tent. Saw something in the trees. Thought it was an elk." Connor's eyes, those wrong yellow eyes, fixed on Thomas with desperate intensity. "But it wasn't an elk, Dad. It was tall, so tall, and thin. Its bones showed through its skin. It had antlers, but they were wrong. They grew from its head at angles that didn't make sense. And it smiled at me. It smiled with too many teeth." Thomas felt ice form in his stomach that had nothing to do with temperature. "You were dreaming. Hypothermia causes hallucinations. Your brain was shutting down." "I'm so hungry," Connor repeated, as if he hadn't heard. "I've never been this hungry." "It hurts, Dad. My stomach hurts. I need to eat. I need..." His eyes focused on Thomas's exposed neck where the face mask had shifted. "You smell like meat." Thomas pulled back instinctively. "Connor, you're in shock. We need to get you to the hospital. I'm calling for an emergency airlift." He reached for his radio, but Connor's hand shot out with speed that shouldn't have been possible given his condition. Fingers, too thin, joints bent at wrong angles, clamped around Thomas's wrist with crushing strength. "It comes at night," Connor whispered. "The thing in the trees. It comes when it's darkest and it whispers. It tells me about hunger, about need, about how good it feels to finally eat after starving for so long. It tells me..." His grip tightened, and Thomas felt bones grind together. "It tells me I'm becoming like it. That hunger is all that matters now. That everything else, love, fear, memory, will burn away until only hunger remains." Thomas wrenched his hand free, stumbling backward out of the structure. Connor didn't follow. He just sat there, wrapped in the thermal blanket, his yellow eyes tracking his father's movement with the fixed attention of something deciding whether to hunt or wait. "We're leaving," Thomas said, his voice shaking. "Right now. I'm going to help you walk, and we're going back to the search teams, and we're getting you medical attention." "I can't walk. I tried. My legs don't work right anymore. The bones are changing." Thomas looked at his son's legs and his stomach lurched. The shapes under Connor's pants weren't right. The joints seemed to be in slightly wrong positions, as if the skeleton beneath had begun to rearrange itself. He grabbed his radio, twisted it on, despite what Maggie would say, despite the questions this would raise. "Base, this is O'Brien. I've found Connor. He's alive but in critical condition. I need immediate medical airlift at coordinates 44, 742 north, 110, 7098 west. Possible severe hypothermia with hallucinations and... He looked at his son's yellow eyes. And complications. Static. Then, Thomas? You're breaking protocol. What's your... The radio died. Not gradually, not with fading signal. Just stopped, as if something had reached into the electronics and strangled the signal at its source. Thomas tried his backup radio. Dead. His GPS flickered, showed coordinates that made no sense, numbers that couldn't exist, that placed him simultaneously in Wyoming and nowhere, in space and outside it. The hunger feels good once you stop fighting, Connor said from inside the structure. It hurts at first, burns, like every cell is on fire, but then you realize the fire is what you are, what you've always been. The hunger is truth. Everything else is a lie we tell ourselves to stay human. The sun touched the western horizon, and shadows grew long across the snow. Thomas realized with horror that he'd spent hours searching, hours climbing, and now night was falling. Night in Yellowstone winter, where temperatures would drop to 30 below, where survival meant fire and shelter. He couldn't carry Connor. His son was 6'2", had been 190 before whatever had happened to him. Even emaciated, Connor weighed too much for Thomas to carry down a mountain in darkness, which meant staying here, in this place, with that structure made of bones, with his son whose eyes had turned yellow and whose legs were bending wrong, and who kept talking about hunger in a voice that sounded less human with every word. Thomas started gathering deadfall, building a fire outside the structure. The dry wood caught quickly, flames pushing back darkness and cold. He set up his emergency shelter, a lightweight tent designed for exactly this situation, and tried the radio again. Still dead. His satellite phone was back at base camp. His cell had no signal this deep in the wilderness, and the battery was dying in the cold anyway. They were alone, father and son, and something else. Something that moved in the trees at the edge of firelight, something tall and thin that made sounds like breaking bones when it walked. Connor crawled out of the bone structure as true dark fell. His movements were wrong, limbs bending at joints that shouldn't bend, body contorting in ways that made Thomas's vision blur with wrongness. His son's face was still recognizable, but it was changing. The bones of his jaw were extending. His teeth were longer when he opened his mouth, and his eyes, those yellow eyes, reflected firelight like an animal's. "I can smell them," Connor said, his voice a rough growl. "The search teams, miles away, but I can smell them. Warm blood, hot meat. They don't know what's out here, they don't know what's hunting them. Connor, fight this, whatever's happening, you're stronger than it. You're my son, you're human." Was human. Connor's neck elongated, vertebrae popping with sounds like snapping wood. "Now I'm becoming something better, something that doesn't lie to itself about what it needs. Do you know how long I've been hungry, Dad? Not just today. Always. Hungry for attention you never gave. Hungry for love you saved for your job. Hungry for a father who actually wanted me instead of resenting the custody arrangement." The words cut deeper than the cold. Thomas stepped toward his transforming son, hands outstretched. "That's not true. I love you. I've always loved you. This trip was about showing you. This trip was about easing your guilt." Connor's face was a mask of bone and stretched skin now, barely recognizable. "But it doesn't matter anymore. Soon I won't remember you, won't remember being human. The hunger will eat those memories. We'll eat everything until only need remains." Movement in the trees. Thomas spun, throwing his flashlight beam toward the sound. It stood at the edge of the clearing, 20 feet tall, impossibly thin, its body a twisted amalgamation of human and elk, and something older than both. Its skull was elongated, antlers growing from the bone in spiral patterns that hurt to perceive. Its ribcage showed through translucent skin, and Thomas could see things moving inside. Not organs, but other things, smaller forms writhing in the cavity where lungs and heart should be. Its eyes were holes of absolute darkness, And when it opened its mouth, the sound that emerged was wind through caves, was screaming prey, was hunger given voice. The Wendigo. Thomas knew it instantly, knew it the way prey knows predator, the way ancestral memory knows things that shouldn't exist but do. The spirit of endless hunger from Algonquian mythology. The transformation that came to those who resorted to cannibalism, who gave in to base needs, who let hunger consume humanity until only appetite remained. It spoke, and its voice was inside Thomas's head, bypassing ears entirely. Your son feeds me now. His hunger, his resentment, his pain. I have eaten his humanity piece by piece, and soon he will be like me. Hunger walking, appetite incarnate. He will hunt these mountains for centuries, and when people come seeking him, he will consume them too. This is the way. This has always been the way. Thomas looked at Connor, at his son's transforming body, at the yellow eyes that held less recognition with every passing moment. His ranger training screamed at him to run, to get help, to let the professionals handle this. But his paternal instinct, the same instinct that had driven him into mountains in winter, that had pushed him beyond exhaustion, that had made him ignore protocol and orders and logic, told him something different. His son was still in there. Buried under transformation and hunger and the Wendigo's influence, Connor was still there. No, Thomas said quietly. The Wendigo tilted its massive skull. No. You can't have him. He's my son, and I don't care what you are or how old you are or what powers you have. You cannot have my son. Laughter like grinding ice. He is already mine. The hunger has taken root. The transformation cannot be stopped. In hours, he will be hunger incarnate, and in days he will forget he was ever human. This is mercy. This is evolution. This is truth. Thomas looked at the fire, at the flames that pushed back cold and dark, fire that humans had mastered millennia ago, that separated humanity from hunger, that made civilization possible, fire that transformed raw meat into cooked food, that allowed sharing instead of devouring, that meant survival could come through community instead of consumption. He grabbed a burning branch from the fire, held it like a weapon, and advanced on his son. Dad? Connor's voice, barely recognizable through the transformation, held a note of fear. What are you doing? Saving you. The Wendigo moved with speed that shouldn't have been possible for something so large. It was at the fire's edge in an instant, reaching for Thomas with hands that had too many fingers, each one ending in claws like broken antlers. Thomas swung the burning branch at those hands. The flames connected with the Wendigo's flesh, and the smell was wrong. Not burning meat or hair, but burning cold, as if ice itself could combust. The creature recoiled, its scream a sound that made Thomas's ears bleed. Fire, Thomas said, understanding flooding through him. You're cold, you're hunger and winter and endless need. Fire is everything you're not. He grabbed another branch, lit it from the fire, and threw it at the bone structure. The deadfall caught immediately, flames racing up the elk bones, consuming the sinew that held them together. The structure collapsed in a shower of sparks, and the Wendigo's scream intensified. That was sanctuary. The voice in Thomas's head was rage now, no longer calm superiority. Built over centuries, fed with the bones of those who gave in to hunger, you cannot destroy it. Watch me. Thomas grabbed Connor, his transforming, starving, changing son, and dragged him toward the fire. Connor fought, claws scoring deep cuts in Thomas's jacket, teeth snapping at his neck, but Thomas held on. Held on the way he should have held on during the divorce, during the custody battles, during all the times he'd let work take priority over family. He pulled Connor into the fire's center, into the heart of the flames, and held him there. The heat was agony. Thomas felt his clothes begin to smolder, felt skin on his hands start to blister. But he held on, held his son while the fire burned away whatever the Wendigo had infected him with, held him while Connor screamed and thrashed and begged. Held him because that's what fathers do. They burn if it means saving their children. The yellow faded from Connor's eyes. Slowly, so slowly the color drained away, replaced by human brown. The bones in his limbs cracked and shifted back toward normal positions. The elongation of his face reversed. And finally, blessedly, Connor stopped fighting and started sobbing. "Dad? Dad, what happened? Why does everything hurt?" Thomas pulled them both out of the flames. They collapsed in the snow beyond the fire, steam rising from their clothes, skin red and blistered but alive. Alive and human and together. The Wendigo stood at the clearing's edge, and for the first time Thomas saw something in its expression beyond hunger. Rage, hatred, and maybe, just maybe, fear. "You have stolen my prey," it said. "Denied me my transformation. This is not ended. I am hunger eternal. I am need incarnate. I will hunt you and yours until the earth grows cold and dark. This I swear." "Then you'll hunt forever," Thomas said, his voice barely a whisper. "Because I won't stop fighting. Not for my son. Not ever." The Wendigo screamed, the sound shattering trees at the clearing's edge. And then it was gone. Not fading, not walking away. Just gone, as if it had never been more than shadow and story. Thomas held Connor as his son shivered and wept, both of them burned and bloody and traumatized but alive. Above them, the stars wheeled in sky so clear and cold it looked like scattered diamonds. In the distance, Thomas heard engines, snowmobiles. The search teams finally reaching their location following the fire's beacon. "I'm sorry," Connor whispered. "I said terrible things. Things I didn't mean." "You weren't yourself." "No." Connor met his father's eyes. "I was myself. The angry parts I try to hide, the hungry parts. It just made them bigger. Made them everything. But they were mine, Dad. My anger, my resentment. It just fed on them until nothing else was left." Thomas pulled his son closer. "Then we'll work on that. Together. We'll figure out how to feed the good parts instead of starving them. Deal?" "Deal." The search teams found them minutes later, bundled them into emergency sleds, raced them back to civilization. The official report said they'd both suffered severe hypothermia, frostbite, and burns from falling into a thermal feature. The structure of bones was attributed to natural accumulation and pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns where none existed. Thomas let them write whatever they wanted. Let them explain it away with science and statistics. He knew the truth. His son knew the truth, and somewhere in the mountains of Yellowstone, where winter turned brutal and shadows grew long, something ancient and hungry knew the truth too. It would wait. It would watch. And someday, when guard dropped and hunger grew strong, it would try again. But not today. Today, Thomas and Connor O'Brien would heal, would talk, would rebuild the relationship that had nearly been consumed by neglect and resentment, would feed love instead of hunger. The Wendigo could wait forever, but Thomas had his son back, and that was enough. 3 months later, Thomas stood in the ranger station processing paperwork when his radio crackled to life. "Station 5, we've got a hiker reporting unusual sounds near Porcelain Basin. Possible thermal activity or wildlife. Can you investigate?" Thomas looked out the window at Yellowstone's spring landscape. Snow had melted, revealing meadows of new grass. Tourists had returned, filling the park with life and noise. Everything looked normal, safe. But he remembered winter, remembered hunger, remembered yellow eyes and bone structures and things that shouldn't exist. "Copy that," he said into the radio. "Heading out now." He grabbed his pack, checked his supplies, and this time, he made sure to bring matches. Lots of matches. Because hunger was patient, and winter always returned. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The tent was inside out. William Archer stood at the edge of the campsite, his breath forming small clouds in the October air, and tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Not collapsed, not torn down, not even damaged. The entire structure had been inverted, stakes driven through fabric that should have been interior, guy lines attached to what had been the floor, the rainfly now serving as ground sheet. Someone had methodically disassembled Madison Garcia's tent and reconstructed it in perfect reverse, leaving her sleeping bag arranged neatly inside, zipped and smoothed as if waiting for her return. William had been a ranger at Glacier National Park for 19 years. He'd seen bear attacks, hypothermia deaths, falls from cliffs, drownings in glacial streams. He'd once spent 4 days searching for a geologist who'd walked into a blizzard and been found 300 yards from his research station, frozen solid with his notebook still clutched in his hand. But he'd never seen anything like this. The campsite itself occupied a small clearing 2 miles up the Grinnell Glacier Trail, elevation 5,200 feet, coordinates 48.7519 again, 113.7261 W. Madison Garcia, 24 years old, doctoral candidate in environmental biology from the University of Montana, had been conducting research on pika populations above the tree line. Her permit allowed her to camp here for 2 weeks. She checked in with the ranger station every evening via satellite phone, the regular schedule, nothing unusual, her voice calm and professional as she reported her findings. Then 3 days ago, October 15, 2008, the call stopped. William had hiked up yesterday at dawn with Jake Morrison, the seasonal ranger who covered the eastern sector. They'd found the campsite exactly as it appeared now, eerily organized, nothing disturbed except for the impossible configuration of the tent. Madison's research equipment sat arranged on a folding table, microscope, sample vials, field journal all present. Her food cache hung properly from a tree branch 20 feet off the ground, bear-proof and untouched. Her Garmin GPS unit lay on a flat stone, powered off, last recorded waypoint showing coordinates that didn't exist in this sector, a location that would place her somewhere beneath Grinnell Glacier itself. Jake had wanted to radio it in immediately, get a full search and rescue team mobilized. William had agreed, following protocol, but something about the scene made him hesitate before calling it in. The precision of it, the deliberateness. This wasn't the chaotic aftermath of an animal attack or the scattered evidence of a panicked flight. This was a message, though he couldn't read the language. Now, standing here alone on his second visit to the site, he'd sent Jake back to coordinate with the SAR team while he conducted a more thorough investigation. William felt the familiar tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the altitude. The same sensation he'd experienced 6 years ago, when they'd found David Chen's body. He pushed the thought away, forcing himself to focus on the present. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since yesterday, unusual even for mid-October. His Motorola radio crackled with static, though they'd had clear communication from this elevation before. The Douglas fir and western larch surrounding the clearing stood absolutely still, no wind moving through their branches despite the frigid air suggesting an approaching weather front. William walked the perimeter of the campsite, eyes scanning for tracks, disturbances, anything that might indicate where Madison had gone. The ground was hard-packed dirt and exposed rock, not ideal for preserving footprints, but he found several near the tent. Madison's hiking boots, women's size 7 tread pattern matching the Merrill Moab she'd listed on her permit application. The prints led toward the trail, then simply stopped 15 feet from the campsite, as if she'd vanished mid-stride. No, not vanished. William crouched down, examining the spot where the tracks ended. Scuff marks in the dirt, deeper impressions, the kind made when someone stumbles or is pulled off balance. And there, barely visible in the thin layer of frost that had formed overnight, other prints, larger, barefoot, human-shaped but wrong in their proportions, the toes too long, the arch too deep, the stride impossibly wide, 6 feet between steps, maybe more. William's hand moved instinctively to the canister of bear spray on his belt. The prints led upslope, away from the trail, toward the higher elevations where the tree line gave way to alpine tundra and exposed rock. He pulled out his own GPS unit, marking the location, then followed the tracks. The temperature continued to drop as he climbed. William's thermometer read 38 degrees Fahrenheit, but it felt colder, the kind of cold that penetrated clothing and settled into bone. The trees thinned, their branches increasingly deformed by prevailing winds and shortened growing seasons. At 6,400 feet, he reached the last stunted whitebark pines, their twisted forms creating grotesque silhouettes against the gray sky. The tracks were easier to follow now, pressed into patches of old snow that lingered in shadowed crevices. William moved carefully, his breathing measured, eyes constantly scanning the terrain. The GPS showed he was heading northwest, toward the glacial cirque that held Grinnell Glacier itself. The massive formation sprawled across the mountainside ahead, its blue-white ice darkened with rock debris and meltwater channels. He'd studied the history of this area. The Blackfeet people had called these mountains the backbone of the world, and considered them sacred. They'd had names for these peaks long before white settlers arrived with their surveying equipment and their own labels. Names that carried warnings. Stories about things that lived in the high places, creatures that walked like men but weren't, spirits that fed on more than flesh. William had dismissed such stories as folklore, the kind of cautionary tales every culture developed to keep people from wandering into dangerous territory. But after David Chen, after finding his partner's body in a cave system that shouldn't have existed according to their topographic maps, William had started paying closer attention to the stories the old-timers told. A sound reached him, distant, carried on air that remained unnaturally still. A voice, perhaps, singing or chanting in a language he didn't recognize. The words seemed to bypass his ears entirely and resonate somewhere deeper, in his sternum, his spine, the hollow spaces behind his eyes. William stopped walking. The sound faded, replaced by absolute silence. No birds, no insects, no wind. Even his own breathing seemed muted, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. He found the first cairn at 7,200 feet. Not a random pile of rocks left by hikers marking their passage, but a deliberate structure. Stones stacked in precise order, largest to smallest, with a bleached piece of driftwood thrust through the top like a spear. Dozens more cairns surrounded it, creating a rough circle perhaps 60 feet in diameter. Each one identical, each one oriented to face inward, toward the center of the circle where the snow had been cleared away to expose bare rock. Symbols covered the exposed stone, not carved but painted, using something dark that might have been charcoal or might have been blood. William recognized some of them from the research he'd done after David's death. Anishinaabe pictographs, similar to rock art found at sacred sites across the Great Lakes region and into the northern plains. Thunderbirds, underwater panthers, wendigos. The word formed in his mind before he could stop it. Wendigo, Wetiko, Weetikau. The pronunciation varied by tribe. Cree, Ojibwe, Algonquin. But the meaning remained consistent. A cannibalistic spirit. A monster created when humans violated the ultimate taboo. The stories described creatures that had once been human, transformed by consuming the flesh of their own kind, driven by insatiable hunger that could never be satisfied. In the old days, people who exhibited certain symptoms, withdrawal, depression, a refusal to eat followed by violent behavior, were sometimes killed preemptively before the transformation could complete. William had read accounts from fur traders and missionaries, their journals describing alleged Wendigo cases with clinical detachment. He'd read anthropological papers that reframed these incidents as cultural manifestations of psychosis, the human mind seeking supernatural explanations for mental illness and starvation-induced desperation. He'd even read one particularly disturbing account from 1907, when a Cree man named Jack Fiddler was arrested for killing 14 people he claimed were turning into Wendigos. The rational part of William's mind, the part trained in scientific methodology and evidence-based reasoning, insisted these were just stories. Cultural mythology, the kind of supernatural explanations people created before they understood psychology and abnormal behavior. But David Chen's body had been found with most of its soft tissue missing. No animal tracks around the cave. No sign of predation by any known species. Just the bones arranged in a pattern that suggested intelligence and purpose, and David's notebook nearby, the last entry written in handwriting that became increasingly erratic. It's so cold. It's always cold now. I'm so hungry, but I can't. I can't. I won't. The radio at William's belt erupted with sound. Not static, but something that might have been words in a language he didn't know. Guttural and rhythmic. He jerked it free, turned the volume down, but the sound continued even after he'd powered the unit completely off. The voice, if it was a voice, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the rock walls, emanating from the cairns themselves. Then he saw her. Madison Garcia stood at the far edge of the circle, perhaps 50 yards away. She wore the same North Face jacket and REI hiking pants described in her permit photo, her long, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked directly at William, her expression blank, and raised one hand in a slow, deliberate wave. Madison? William's voice sounded strange in his own ears, thin and distorted. Madison Garcia? She didn't respond. Didn't move except for that one hand, still raised, still waving with mechanical precision. William started toward her, circling the edge of the cairn formation rather than crossing through the center. He'd taken perhaps 5 steps when Madison turned and walked away, moving with a strange gliding gait that didn't match the rough terrain. William followed, maintaining his distance, keying his radio despite knowing it wouldn't work. "This is Ranger Archer. I've located the missing hiker at coordinates." He checked his GPS and stopped. The screen showed no coordinates at all, just a blank blue field with the words "Signal Lost" blinking in the corner. Madison disappeared behind an outcropping of rock. William increased his pace, boots slipping on loose scree, breath coming harder in the thin air. When he rounded the outcropping, he found himself at the entrance to a narrow ravine, its walls rising 40 feet on either side, the bottom choked with old snow and ice. Madison's footprints led inward, clearly visible in the snow. No other prints accompanied them. The ravine curved after 20 yards, cutting off sight of the entrance. The temperature plummeted. William's thermometer now read 21 degrees, a physical impossibility given the time of day and season. His breath came in great billowing clouds. Ice crystals formed on his eyelashes, his beard, the exposed skin of his face. He found Madison's jacket first, discarded on the snow as if she'd simply shrugged it off. Then her fleece, her thermal shirt, her hiking pants. The trail of discarded clothing led deeper into the ravine, each item laid out deliberately, creating a path. William's training screamed at him that this was wrong, that hypothermia victims did sometimes exhibit paradoxical undressing in the final stages. But this wasn't that. This was too organized, too intentional. The ravine opened into a small cirque, a bowl-shaped depression carved by ancient glacial action. At its center stood a figure. For a moment, one blessed, ignorant moment, William thought it was Madison. The proportions were roughly human, the general shape familiar. Then his mind processed what he was actually seeing, and his body locked up, every muscle contracting in primal terror. The thing stood 7 feet tall, skeletal, its skin pulled tight over bones that seemed too large for any human frame. Antlers sprouted from its skull, not the graceful curves of an elk, but broken, twisted things that looked like they'd been forced through the bone rather than growing naturally. Its eyes were black pits that reflected no light. Its mouth opened far too wide, revealing teeth that had been filed or broken into points. It held Madison Garcia in its arms like a parent cradling a sleeping child. She was naked, her skin blue-white with cold, frost-forming patterns across her exposed flesh. Her eyes were open but unseeing, her chest rising and falling with shallow, rapid breaths. Alive. Somehow still alive. The creature looked at William, and he heard that voice again, not through his ears but directly in his mind, speaking in Algonquian words he shouldn't understand but did. Moniao, outsider. You have no power here. William's hand moved toward his bear spray, knowing even as he did so that the gesture was meaningless. You didn't bear spray a spirit. You didn't pepper spray a myth made flesh. The creature's mouth moved and it spoke again. this time in English that sounded like it was being forced through a throat not designed for human language. She came seeking knowledge. She sought to understand the hunger of the small creatures, the pikas who store food against the winter. I showed her true hunger, the hunger that cannot be satisfied, the hunger that transforms. Madison stirred in the creature's arms, and William saw that her hands were stained dark red, her mouth too, and scattered around the cirque, partially covered by fresh snowfall, he could see what looked like bones. Small bones, pika bones perhaps, or perhaps not. It starts small, the creature continued, its voice a sound like wind through dead trees. A necessity, survival. But hunger grows. Hunger always grows. She understands now. She will become another walker in the cold places, another voice in the wind. William found his own voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Let her go. The creature made a sound that might have been laughter. She does not wish to go. The transformation has begun. The hunger fills her. Soon she will be strong. Soon she will hunt. William thought of David Chen, of the notebook entry, of the bones arranged in careful patterns. He thought of the stories he'd dismissed as superstition, the warnings he'd ignored because they didn't fit his understanding of how the world worked. The creature began to change, its form blurring and shifting. For a moment it looked human, gaunt, starving, but human. Then the antlers sprouted again, the mouth distended, the limbs elongated. Madison moaned, a sound of desperate hunger that made William's stomach clench. He did the only thing he could think of. He ran, down the ravine, slipping on ice, careening off rock walls, his mind blank with terror. Behind him he heard movement, not footsteps but something else. A sound like wind and cracking ice and bones grinding together. He didn't look back, couldn't look back. Every survival instinct he possessed screamed at him to run faster, climb higher, get away from that place. He burst out of the ravine as the sun touched the western peaks, late afternoon light turning the snow golden red. The temperature immediately rose, climbing back to something approaching normal. William kept running, following his own GPS track back toward the campsite, his lungs burning, his legs trembling with exhaustion. The radio squawked with Jake's voice suddenly clear. William? William, you there? SAR team is assembling. They'll be on site by 0600 tomorrow. What's your status? William stopped, bent double, gasping for breath. His hands shook as he raised the radio. Negative contact with the missing hiker. Continuing search. We'll maintain position at the campsite overnight. Copy that. You okay? You sound... I'm fine. Archer out. He wasn't fine. He would never be fine again. But he couldn't explain what he'd seen. Couldn't describe it in language that would make sense to Jake or the SAR team or anyone who hadn't stood in that cirque and looked into those black pit eyes. William reached the campsite as darkness fell. Madison's inside-out tent still sat in the clearing, that impossible construction that now seemed like a warning rather than a mystery. He built a fire, more for the light than the warmth, and sat with his back against a tree, his canister of bear spray in one hand and his radio in the other. The night grew colder, far colder than it should have been. William watched the tree line, seeing shapes that might have been shadows or might have been something else. He heard sounds, snapping branches, the crunch of footsteps in old snow, a voice singing in Algonquian. Around midnight he saw her. Madison stood at the edge of the firelight, naked and impossibly gaunt, her skin stretched tight over bones that seemed to have lengthened since he'd seen her in the cirque. Her eyes were black pits, her mouth opened too wide. William. His name in her voice, but wrong, distorted. William Archer, you should have stayed. The hunger is so beautiful, so pure. I understand now what David understood. Why he stayed in the cave. Why he couldn't leave. William's finger tightened on the bear spray trigger. David Chen was my friend. David Chen was your meal. Madison took a step closer, and William saw that her feet didn't quite touch the ground, that she moved through the air rather than across it. He fed me for weeks, kept me strong, kept me hunting. But I'm so hungry again, William. I'm always so hungry. She lunged, and William sprayed. The capsaicin mist passed through her as if she were made of smoke. Her hand, cold, so cold it burned, closed around his throat. He felt his body temperature plummeting, frost forming on his skin, his blood turning sluggish in his veins. "Feed me," she whispered, her breath a wind from the glaciers, ancient and pitiless. "Feed me and join me. We'll hunt together. Like you and David hunted together. Like you should have hunted together." William's vision darkened. His free hand scrabbled at his belt, fingers closing around something he'd carried for 6 years. A small pouch, given to him by an elder from the Blackfeet reservation after David's death. Medicine, the old man had called it. Protection. William had taken it to be polite, never believing he'd actually need it. He tore the pouch open and flung the contents at Madison's face. Cedar ash, sage, tobacco, sweetgrass, and something else. Something that smelled of copper and salt. The substance burst into flame as it touched her. Not normal fire, but something blue-white and cold, burning without consuming. Madison screamed, a sound that wasn't human, wasn't animal, wasn't anything that should exist in the natural world. She released William and stumbled backward, smoke rising from her skin. The fire spread across her body and she began to change, shifting between forms. Madison, the creature from the cirque, a gaunt man with David Chen's face, something ancient and starving that had walked these mountains long before humans gave it a name. Then she was gone, dissipated like morning mist, leaving only scorch marks in the snow and the echo of that terrible scream fading into the mountains. William lay gasping by his fire, his throat bruised, his body shaking with more than cold. He stayed awake through the rest of the night, feeding the flames, watching the darkness, the medicine pouch's ashes scattered at his feet. The SAR team arrived at dawn, 12 people, including Jake and a K-9 unit, equipped for a multi-day search operation. William met them at the trailhead, his face haggard, his eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness. "Any sign of her?" Jake asked. William shook his head. "Negative. I searched up to 7,500 feet. Found some tracks, but they led to a ravine system. Too dangerous to proceed alone. Weather moved in. Temperature dropped. I had to pull back. It was close enough to the truth. The SAR team would search. They'd find the campsite, the inside-out tent, the strange cairns if they went high enough. They'd find Madison's discarded clothing in the ravine. They might even find the cirque, though William doubted it. Places like that had a way of hiding themselves when they chose. But they wouldn't find Madison Garcia. She was gone, transformed, walking the high places where the Picas stored food against winter and the wind sang songs in dead languages. They wouldn't find her, just like they'd never really found David Chen. Just bones and notebooks and questions that couldn't be answered in reports filed with the National Park Service. The official search lasted 6 days. They recovered Madison's personal effects from the campsite, her research notes, her identification. They documented the strange configuration of the tent, the investigators photographing it from multiple angles, speculation ranging from animal interference to an elaborate prank. They found her clothing in the ravine, but no sign of the cirque, no evidence of the cairns William had seen. The rocks were there, certainly, but arranged in natural formations, no pattern or purpose visible in daylight. Madison Garcia was declared lost, presumed dead, another tragedy in the long history of people who underestimated the wilderness. The case would remain open for 7 years, then be officially closed, filed away with hundreds of others. William Archer requested a transfer 2 weeks later. He was reassigned to Olympic National Park in Washington State, about as far from Glacier as he could get while remaining in the NPS system. He never returned to Montana. Never hiked above the tree line again if he could help it. He kept a new medicine pouch on his belt, prepared this time by a Maka elder, who asked no questions when William described the contents he needed. Sometimes, late at night, he heard singing in languages he didn't understand. Sometimes he saw shapes moving at the edges of campsites, too tall and too thin to be human. Sometimes his GPS failed for no reason, showing impossible coordinates, places that couldn't exist according to any map, but he didn't investigate, didn't follow the tracks into the high places. He'd learned his lesson, paid his price, survived where David and Madison hadn't. The mountains kept their secrets, and the things that walked there, the hungry ones, the transformed ones, the spirits wearing human skin, remained in the cold places, waiting for the next researcher, the next hiker, the next person who climbed too high and learned too much about the true nature of hunger. William Archer lived another 23 years. He retired from the Park Service in 2031, moved to Seattle, took up woodworking as a hobby. He died peacefully in his sleep in his apartment overlooking Puget Sound, his body discovered by a neighbor after 3 days. The medical examiner noted several unusual details in his report. The deceased's body temperature at time of discovery was significantly below normal despite the heated apartment. Frost had formed on the windows, unusual for the temperate climate, and though the man had apparently died of natural causes, cardiac arrest, common in men of his age, his face was locked in an expression of absolute terror, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, his mouth open as if screaming. The neighbor mentioned hearing something the night William died. Singing, she said, in a language she didn't recognize. Coming from his apartment, or maybe from somewhere much farther away, carried on a wind that smelled of ice and ancient stone and something worse, hunger, vast and insatiable, that could never be satisfied no matter how much it consumed. But that detail didn't make it into the official report. Just another old man dying alone, his secrets buried with him, the things he'd seen and survived consigned to memory and dust. The mountains remembered, though. The cold places kept their accounting, and when the wind blew down from the high peaks, carrying the scent of glaciers and cedar ash, those who knew how to listen could hear the voices singing in dead languages, calling to each other across the vast distances, forever hungry, forever hunting, forever waiting for the next person to climb too high and learn what waited there in the places where the maps ended and the old stories began. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.